sea defence promenade around Fairhaven Lake, and then cuts in following the footpath that you see here towards Inner Promenade, and then follows Inner Promenade, and then juts back out again to follow the Church Scar Promenade, and then that continues along Lytham Front, including the Lytham Green area as well. The second element of the application is 2 parking bays. These are existing parking bays that were formed as part of the Sea Defence scheme. And the third element is this grassland parcel, which is where the new facility is proposed. That is allocated existing open space for both amenity and semi-natural purposes. The land take of the developed area will be approximately 3.5% of the green space at Granny's Bay. The site itself, that's bound by the Sea Defence Promenade to the south, a car parking area, and again the open space to the east, which extends to the full width of Granny's Bay. The Sea Defence is a very popular footpath. It always was and has been, and certainly has increased footfall since that development came forward. The footpath continues around Fairhaven Lake, but it also has an important connection which runs through the car park, along this path in front of the kiosk, and then down into Fairhaven Lake in that direction. Just a couple of photos of the kiosk as it appears at the moment. Personally, it's not really of any architectural merit. It's been there for a long time, nonetheless. Painted render, red tile roof. If it was designed these days, though, that relationship to Inner Promenade certainly isn't going to be acceptable. It has a rear-facing aspect, doesn't provide activity to that street scene. The impact of that rear elevation to Inner Promenade, though, it is certainly dampened by the presence of mature trees, and you do tend to lose that building to a certain extent in the street scene because of its scale and that landscaping. There are highway safety issues associated to the Eastern Kiosk. This picture was taken and it demonstrates when queues forming at the existing kiosk, then it blocks the footpath. Anybody using that footpath has to detach themselves, walk along the access road that serves the car park before returning back onto the footpath to join and enter Fairhaven Lake. Obviously, there's only one person there at the moment. In busier periods, those queues are much longer, and obviously that will require greater lengths of pedestrians being within that access road, heightening the concerns for conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles. Just a few example photos of the development site. So it's a grassland parcel and it's positioned to the west of the open spaced area. The land levels on it are relatively flat, albeit they are set to a higher level than the promenade and to the footpath that's to the north. It's adjacent to the Sea Defence and the car park. So surrounding character, there's a defined line really in terms of where the built form ends and the more open aspects of Granny's Bay and Fairhaven Lake start, and that's defined by the Inner Promenade. You find that, say, most of the development is located to the north of Inner Promenade with more open aspects to the south. There are buildings, though, within that southern area, such as within Fairhaven Lake, the existing kiosk, the toilet block, and then there is also a shelter to the eastern edge of Granny's Bay. The development within the settlement, that's focused on Marine Drive and the junction within a promenade. They're 4 stories in height. From that, the scale reduces back to a more traditional 2-story scale. Construction materials are red brick and render. There are large expanses of glazing, patio, external terrace areas which take advantage of views over the coastline. So moving on to the development that we're considering, there's 2 dimensions really to this. The first one is the demolition of the existing kiosk building, which is in this location. Once demolished, that area will be hard landscaped and will represent a widening of the footpath in that location. The development itself, that represents a triangular footprint, reflecting the shape and form more or less of the application site. It measures 23 by 26 by 13 and is approximately 109 square meters in footprint. That is increased by the overhang of the roof to about, from memory, about 140, maybe 150 square meters. Beyond the footprint, hard surfacing, there's no landscaping in the scheme. It is all hard surfaced around the building. That hard surfacing will tie in with the existing promenade finish, which is a filed buff exposed aggregate concrete. The floor plan of the building, it demonstrates a servery and prep and store area. There's also ancillary spaces in this location, which include cleaning cupboards, bin store, staff and customer toilets. Excuse me. There has been objection with regards to the uses that are proposed within the scheme, particular reference to restaurants and to public houses. We are considering, obviously, the development in front of us. That development is for making and selling of ice cream, hot and cold drinks, confectionery, cold food, and the small selection of hot food. Now, the applicant has confirmed to us that it's going to be paninis and toasties, certainly not a restaurant use. The floor plan also shows that there's no ovens or deep fat fryers or anything within that floor plan either. The floor plan also demonstrates that these areas here, which are glazing, they surround the covered seating area. These are retractable. That allows for the glazing to be concertinaed back on itself to allow these spaces then to become an external space, albeit the roof would still overhang that space to give some kind of shelter. The scheme also includes some sliding shutters. They're of a corten steel design. Again, when secure, they follow this path. But when the building's open, they concertina against themselves to sit against the actual main body of the building. There's also reference to alcohol sales. That is subject to separate licensing by Falborough Council. But the amenity considerations certainly are still pertinent to the assessment of this planning application. The elevations that have been provided, they demonstrate the building when it's open and when it's closed. You can see it's a flat roof form. It makes use of imprinted concrete. That's to represent horizontally laid weathered timber board cladding. As mentioned, it's got sliding glazed doors in this location and this location. These are the sliding corten steel. Now, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with corten steel. It is a material that is becoming increasingly popular to be used in development, and it's effectively weathered metal. So it has the orange rusty effect of weathered metal. The rainwater goods, extraction and bin stores are all hidden within the scheme. If we just flick back to the floor plan, you can see that the bin store is in this location. It's integrated within the building, meaning that there's no external storage of bins. And obviously when the bin store is not in use, it's covered by one of these corten steel shutters in this location here. The scheme also includes a green sedum roof, and that's for biodiversity purposes. Just a couple of visuals for you. So the top left, that's looking in an easterly direction along the Granny's Bay. Top right, that's looking more out in a southerly direction towards the estuary. And then we've got a couple of viewpoints from the promenade looking back inland. And then those two viewpoints are replicated with the glazing closed and also with the steel shutters in situ. So moving on to the summary of consideration. So as members will know, one of the fundamental matters that we look at is principle of development. That encompasses three main issues. The first one is settlement boundary, the second one is the open space designation, And the third one is potential impact to town, district and local centres. So the locational strategy of the local plan encourages most new development to be within the settlement boundary. Obviously, as we found earlier, there's elements of the scheme which are positioned outside of the settlement boundary, thus would be contrary to that locational strategy within the local plan. Notwithstanding that though, policy's map has not been updated to reflect the new sea defence scheme. Subsequent revision would logically revise the settlement boundary to follow the route of the promenade, the new promenade that is, which is here. And the reason for that is so that it would tie in with the existing settlement boundary, which follows the existing promenade around Fairhaven Lake, and then follows the existing promenade along Church Scar and all the way along Lytham Green. The second issue is the open space designation. So the designation is covered by policy EMV3, which recognises the importance of the green infrastructure, states that inappropriate development will be resisted. Policy EC6 seeks to promote Lytham St Anne's as a tourist destination. Criteria D of that policy refers to reconstruction and enhancement of the coastal defences to encourage coastal tourism and recreation. Criteria H refers to general promotion of coastal tourism. It has to be acknowledged that the proposal will result in the loss of a portion of the existing open space designation, undoubtedly. Policy in V3 does not, however, safeguard existing open space from all forms of development. By resisting inappropriate development, that wording infers a presumption in favour of appropriate development. The existing kiosk, the open space designation, as well as Fairhaven Lake and the sea defence, they all make an important contribution towards the quality of coastal tourism in the borough. The proposal will diversify that existing ice cream kiosk facility, enhancing coastal tourism in the area whilst promoting Granny's Bay as a tourist destination. This allows support for the application as an appropriate form of development in accordance with ENV3. Finally, in regards to principle, we have town centre impact. So we have policy EC5, which refers to a hierarchy of centres of town, district and local centres. That main town centre uses, such as that has been applied for, should be directed towards. The main aim of that policy is to protect the health and vitality or vibrancy of our existing centres from development that could undermine those centres, whether that's through the take-up of vacant units or trade diversion away from that centre. EC5 requires consideration of alternative sites within existing centres, then of edge of centre locations, and lastly, out of centre. That forms a sequential test approach, which is in accordance with the framework. The applicant's sequential test is based on the catchment of the existing kiosk and considered sites within the closest centre, which is Ansell District Centre, some 280 metres walking distance from the application site. The test recognised and discounted 7 vacant units within the district centre due to size, whether they're being too big or too small, or for availability reasons, so they're not marketed or they're actually having works undertaken to them. Retail policy and planning is a bit of a dark art, and in a lot of circumstances we bring in external consultants to get advice, and we use them on the Aldi scheme in Lytham, if members recall that scheme. We've used the same consultant consistently with all those applications, and the advice that's been received is in front of you on the screen, but I'll read it for brevity. So it's having regard to the location requirements of the application, the scale of the proposed development, and the advice that a sequential assessment should be appropriate and proportionate. My judgment is that the applicant has satisfied the sequential test, and on that basis it's concluded that the vitality and viability of the district centre would not be undermined. Another consideration of the development is the visual appearance and obviously the consequent impact to the character of the area. So we have policy GD7, which requires high standards of design. The site of the new building is going to be highly prominent. It's surrounded on all 3 sides by public vantage points. It's unavoidable. Notwithstanding, we think design is acceptable, and there's 3 main reasons for that. The triangular footprint reflects the shape of the application site. The design of the scheme provides activity and visual interest to all elevations. There's lots of glazing in the scheme, which allows views and activity into the building, but also maximises views out of the building as well for people who may be using the facility. There's a flat Sedum roof and a overhang of that roof itself, and combined with the materials that provide for a sleek and modern design. Those materials, they do contrast with the prevalent character, which is red brick and render within the area, but nonetheless they are reflective of the coastal location. With regards to impact on character, we have policy ENV1 that requires development to have regard to its visual impact within its landscape context, and that will be assessed to consider whether it's appropriate to the landscape character, amenity and tranquility within which it's set. Again, the proposal will alter the undeveloped appearance of the site, unquestionable, but it is a peripheral part of that open space designation, dominated by the sea defence, footpath and car parking area. The contribution that the application site makes to the character of the wider space is therefore much lower than the open space as a total. Excuse me. Existing views through the application site will also alter. There'll be obstruction of views to the coastline from Marine Drive in certain viewpoints, and obstruction of views to Fairhaven Lake from certain viewpoints. But design and scale will ensure that the building is absorbed into that landscape, sitting comfortably within the context of the sea defence and car parking area. There's also benefits associated with the demolition of the building. The building will remove a building that represents a poor relationship to a promenade. It will also open up views into Fairhaven Lake and to Granny's Bay as well. Harm will arise to the character of the site and open space it forms part of, but harm would be minimal and not sufficient to warrant refusal of development, bearing in mind the benefits that the development would bring to tourism from the demolition of the existing building and to highway safety, which I'll discuss in the next slide. I'll grab a quick drink now from that. Highway and pedestrian safety. So policy GD7 requires that development should not prejudice highway safety or pedestrian safety and the efficient, convenient movement of all highway users. The development includes 2 spaces for staff and is supported by other parking within the area, whether that be Centrebank car park, on-street car parking or other car parks within the area that serve Fairhaven Lake. The applicant has also confirmed servicing requirements for the scheme. That's confirmed that it will include existing servicing arrangements, so that involves the tenant's car, as well as a small commercial van, which will deliver approximately 3 times a week. Refuse collection isn't confirmed, however, but it is considered that there's sufficient space within the car park or to adjacent roads to facilitate that waste removal. I mentioned earlier about the highway safety problems associated with kiosk users of the footpath having to step out when there's queues at the kiosk. So obviously demolition and widening of that footpath will alleviate that concern. So there's certainly highway safety benefit associated to the scheme. And the applicants also provided a construction management plan that confirms that the compound will be located within the car park, including storage of materials, the delivery area, parking of contractors, and with deliveries confirmed to be outside of peak times and wheel wash facilities, not wheel ash facilities. The Highway Authority has also been consulted on the scheme, and they have no objection to the proposal or the construction management plan as proposed. I've focused on the main issues. Obviously, the report does consider the other matters such as amenity, ecology, flood risk, and integrity of the sea defences. But on that basis, Chair, the recommendation is to approve the scheme subject to adoption of the Habitat Regulation Assessment and schedule of appropriate conditions.
Thank you very much, Rob, for that detailed presentation. And now I throw it open to debate. So, councillors, this is your opportunity to ask questions or talk about some of the things you're thinking about. Councillor Ahmed.
Yeah, I'll go first. 5 pages of notes from those fantastic speakers, so I'll be here for a while. Yeah, I'd like to thank the speakers for everything as well, and risking life and limb driving on our barely usable roads to get here and being late with medical stuff after 21 hours in hospital myself the other day, getting no service from that either. It's great that we've got to spare £500,000 to throw at one tiny ice cream cabinet rather than looking after our community. 5 years after I got the St Anne's Town Centre development group put together, we haven't yet started really doing anything significant on that as yet, but we've got £500,000 to throw at one shop over at Fairhaven, not look after our town centre. We all work here a lot and we understand development, and we know that development costs, and we have to understand this, and it's a bit of math, is about third land, third build, third profit. That's how it works generally. This is land we're giving away for free. It's got to be worth £500,000. Development's £500,000. So this ice cream hut will be worth £1.5 million when it's developed. Or we've entered into a commercially disastrous decision on the cost for building this. You can buy a 2 or 3 bedroom brand new house just down the road with a lovely kitchen, lovely bathroom for 130k, not 500k to build an ice cream hut, bar, pub, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't make any sense. It's been shut the last few times I've been down past there as well. So in terms of commercial viability of paying back the costs against the rent, doesn't work. It says there is no sequentially preferred alternative in Ansdell on page 35, and you quoted 7 empty units. 7 units sitting there empty and slightly too big, slightly too small. It got like Goldilocks, to be honest. If there's 7 units sitting in a town centre, sitting there redundant, and they need a massive new place to make ice cream, go and make ice cream in one of those 7. And don't open a pub on the front of Fairhaven. Just use the hut you've already got. The applicant has demonstrated a locational need for replacement. It states on page 35 as well. It doesn't explain what that means, and it doesn't go into the detail of where that comes or what the locational need is, given that we've got another cafe just around the corner, we've got ice cream huts, and we've got other things around the lake. I can see this being the death knell of Fairhaven once it's opened and selling its lagers and beers and wines on the front in the summer. I see Fairhaven being gone, Fairhaven pub gone at that stage. The rent, I've covered that. We know the cost for COVID has gone up hugely. I'm getting my roof done and my pointing done at the moment. The costs are through the roof. We know this original 360 from 4 years ago is potentially, I would even say it's probably doubled now. So in terms of council tax wastage, I'm willing to bet this gets close to £750,000 by the time we finish this, to build one hut for one business instead of investing in our area. In terms of this concept that something might change in the future, so we can go with it now on boundaries, once we've set precedent for that, I guess we're going to be doing the same for all developers as well, that all developers will be able to guess that a boundary might change sometime in the future. Just because we're the council, we can't go breaking rules or making assumptions to suit our own needs when we would then not be fair to other developers. That doesn't seem right to me. And if we set that precedent and they went to appeal and we said, well, you've done it once, we make the boundaries up to suit our needs. We can't do that. Wait until the boundaries have changed if you want to do that and then do it, but don't make it up because it might happen to suit us. Otherwise, we'd have to do it for all developers. We've got, FBC has a history of not great franchise management. We have a wine bar pub available on Fairhaven Lake. It doesn't open in the evenings when people want to go for a drink in the evenings to watch the sunset and have a drink. Manage our own franchises better, make what we've got work better, and we don't need another bar at Fairhaven. Once it's built, and we've had this before with the change from bank to BT to funeral home, just down the road here. My understanding is something, once it's built as a commercial venture, it does not have to stay as what that venture is built for. It can then be a commercial venture that can apply to change at any time. So a kebab shop, a nightclub, it can become anything. So once this is up, 2 years down the road, it wants to be a nightclub, it comes to us, we say yes or no on that. We can't stop that happening. That's the idea of it not having a cooker. I'm renovating a flat at the moment. I've got a plug. I've plugged one in. I've got a cooker. It's the idea of saying it isn't being built with a cooker is so naive. It's ridiculous. If you've got a socket, you've got a cooker. It's bigger. If it's bigger, why can't we build it where it is? I know you say that's an ugly building with a back that isn't very attractive. And I love the highway argument on a brand new road that the highways have just built and put in place and obviously signed off as being safely. You cannot get LCC to build us a brand new road and then say we built an unsafe road. It's a non-argument. So therefore, if we move that road slightly, build it where it is, build it bigger if you want to, fine. But that doesn't, it's going to cost less than £500,000 to do that because it's on brown site build, which is what we're meant to be doing on brown site building as well, not green site building. Look, we all love France and Spain. We all love a frontage of pubs and bars. And once we've got one up, we can have 2 or 3 or 4. But is that really where we want to go? Lytham Green is a lot bigger than Fairhaven Lake. It has an ice cream hut. It has an ice cream van, the Lytham Green. We already have a big cafe, a couple of ice cream huts. We have at least 3 outlets on Fairhaven. With this one is 4. We don't need the justification. If Lytham Green, if this is justification for Fairhaven, it must be justification for Lytham Green to have buildings all the way down it as well. In your response, can you also cover off the demolition questions that were asked by one of the questionnaires, please? Because that isn't covered off in detail in the report. In page 63, it's only moving 20 metres. As such, does it need to move at all? Also, on the math, can you just help me with my maths? You say its footprint is 24 metres by 20 metres, which gives a footprint of 115 metres. That's not quite my math. 24 times 20 gives 492. So it's a triangle. Okay. So, but at the moment it's 6.5 by 4.4, and now it's going to 24 by 20. That is a massive increase, a huge construction from where it is at the moment. At the moment, we've got our Conservative councillors proposing a ban of camper vans along the prom, because putting things on the prom would spoil the view and create noise. And today we've got people here saying we want to spoil the view and create noise. So if we're banning camper vans for one reason and then putting a pub up instead to do exactly that reason, how do you justify your own thinking in that? It doesn't make any logical sense. If you're doing one because you don't like it and doing another one which is a permanent blot, not a temporary blot, it doesn't make any sense. On page 69, there's no evidence to suggest the sale of alcohol will result in neighbours' concerns. I would just suggest you go out at night. If that's what you really believe, that alcohol doesn't have any noise effect or has any detriment on a local area, I suggest maybe hang around Lytham Piazza sometimes about 9 o'clock and see if sale of alcohol has no effect on a local area. Again, naive writing to get a result. It's not factually correct. In fact, the council are running a survey in Lytham at the moment on what the effect of the nighttime is on the locals. If we're going to do it, I guess from a planning point of view, we're going to find it impossible, to be honest, to reject it unless somebody finds something on here. Could it be slightly sunk? It's a lot of round ground there. Could it be sunk at the back so it's lower visual from the back and higher at the front? So you've got a different design that it could be more invisible and more buried, because it is a big curve that comes up there and drops significantly. So you have got an opportunity to have a 2-storey front and a 1-storey back with and lower the visibility side.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'll bring in the officer and he might be able to address some
Right.
of the points before you finish.
I'm done. That's me. I'm done for now.
Thanks, councillor. Just picking up on the land levels issue, I think you're right that the land is almost domed. It kind of steps up from the northern footpath, then steps down a little bit from a high land level to the setback wall of the sea defence. The plans provided show that land level is going to be reduced, so it'll tie in more or less with the levels of the existing footpaths and promenades. So it's not going to be built on top of the grass. It's going to be set. It's going to sit into it. I wasn't going to be honest with you. It is all laid out in the report. There is obviously a need for a sequential test to be submitted. That has to be relevant to the development applied for and based upon a specific catchment associated to that development. Because there's an existing kiosk, then that catchment is influenced by the kiosk that's in situ at the moment. So the catchment, in essence, is restricted more or less to walkers on the promenade. or visitors to Granny's Bay and Fairhaven Lake. So we then look at what centres potentially might be affected, whether or not there is reason for the development to be located within that centre. The sequential test identified a number of vacant units in there, potentially more, potentially less, bearing in mind that there's been a bit of passage of time. Nonetheless, those were discounted because of the size of the unit being either too big or too small. We can't force the applicant to reduce the footprint, to squeeze them into a unit. There has to be a certain give and take. But nonetheless, because of the catchment, then obviously there is a genuine locational need for the development to be in that location. What I will say, though, is that the site is also positioned on the edge of Ansell District Centre. It's not within, but it's on the edge. So in terms of sequential preference in the framework, it says you have to look at town centre locations or district centre locations in the first instance, and then look at edge of centre locations as a sequential preference to that town centre location. The site is within 280 metres. By definition, it is edge of centre as well. So it might not be provided sequentially in the first tier, but it's certainly meeting the second tier of sequentially preferable sites.
Can you comment on the presumption of boundary change in our favour, and how we would stop other
that
developers
was to do with the
using
sequential test. The settlement boundary issue, it is a consideration in the assessment plan application. Whether that boundary changes or not, there's a boundary definition defined by the promenade. That ties in quite clearly with the promenade and the settlement boundary that goes around Fairhaven Lake. It also ties in clearly with the boundary that goes along Church Scar, which includes the Dune network on Church Scar. It also includes Lytham Green within the settlement boundary. So any direction going forward, I can't say with assurance, but it's likely that the boundary will be changed to reflect the new promenade location. Any further comments, Mark?
I suppose the issue is, notwithstanding that, the application has been assessed based on the current policies. So the question about whether it will change in the future is not a assessment of whether the policy will be changed. The question that has got to be answered is, determination of application should be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So the fact that there have been changes in that area since that boundary was assessed is a material consideration to be taken into consideration. And that's what that part of the report and the presentation is seeking to address. So that is that's the issue. It has changed since that line was drawn in a plan. We cannot with 100% confidence say it will change in the future, but there is a change in circumstances which needs to be taken into account.
Just one more response, Chair, please. In terms of the change of use, Councillor Ahmed, yes, in the future, then the building could be subject to change of use plan applications. Obviously, that would be subject to assessment against the council's policies at that time. Usually, this type of development would be categorised within the new use class C, which is a very broad land use classification and would allow a change of use to a number of different alternative uses without control. Because of our assessment and the linkage to tourism, we feel it necessary, and there's a condition in the report to restrict the use to the use that's been applied for. So that is for the making and selling of ice cream, hot and cold food sales, drinks, and those kind of things. But that means, though, any alternative use requires planning permission. So it wouldn't be able to start operating as a restaurant. It wouldn't be able to start operating as a public house. And if the nature of the restaurant and public house uses within the existing use changed, so that the restaurant became the primary function or the public house alcohol sales became the primary function, that would be operating not in accordance with the restriction, so would need planning permission. So we could then invite plan application, assess at that time the acceptability of that land use that's proposed.
demolition. What's happening with the right for us to demolish it, we don't know.
Sorry, I missed that.
The point that was raised by the speaker on the rights for us to demolish a building that we don't own.
I will refer that to our legal team, I think. Ian?
I'm not sure I understand the premise of the question. A building that we don't own, which building is that, through you, Chairman? The ice cream kiosk at the moment. Well, it's not a matter of that has an impact on this planning application. If the planning, I'll be guided by Rob and by Mr. Evans. I presume that the planning application, the three elements of it go together and will be either conditioned or in some other way required to be pursued together, so that the demolition would have to take place if the new facility was to be built.
Chairman, if I may, through you, yes, that is the case. There's a condition proposed which requires that to be demolished. If there is any reason why that cannot be demolished, then it would not be possible to implement the planning permission as proposed. The land ownership in that terminology is not necessarily material. Anyone can apply for planning permission on other people's land. So, for example, you could apply to build an extension on my house. That will be perfectly legitimate. I might not let you do that, and obviously that's a separate matter outside the planning controls.
Right, we've got a number of speakers. I'm anxious to give everybody an opportunity to contribute to the debate. And first on the list, I think we've got 4 or 5 names, but first on the list is Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your all the details about the kiosk. It's a very emotive application. There's a lot of people who are very, very passionate about where it is and what it is. On both sides of the argument, from where I can see. But we have to look at this as a planning application, as we do every single application that we're sitting in. We're not looking at a pub, we're not looking at a restaurant, we're looking at a kiosk building. I've got a couple of questions. Further expansion to the seating. Would the seating that is there, would it be allowed to be spilled out onto the green further, or would there be a restriction to say no, the seating isn't allowed to go any further than the building?
Yeah, obviously the application includes red line, which I'll just find. So this is the layout, basically, of the development. So in theory, yes, the seating could spill out into the red edge of the plan application. So that would be in these areas.
Okay.
Obviously, you've got to be conscious, or any prospective tenant needs to be conscious of blocking the footpath. And I think that would be subject to a pavement licence as well, Mark. Correct me if I'm wrong. So
they'd have to apply for a separate licence to sort of use that area. Right, okay.
Not beyond the settlement. Sorry, beyond the application side. So use of the promenade for seating certainly would require a pavement licence.
Yeah, I mean, it would be I understand the applicant the tenant to tell people don't take your chairs there if they're not allowed to sit them there, isn't it? That they would have to control that.
Yes.
Right, okay, that's fine. The bin access, it's at the back, and the bin wagons can get down there fully to there wouldn't ever be stored rubbish that could be accessed, and somebody it's fully accessible with a bin.
It's fully accessible. Like I said, there's no servicing details within the scheme, but obviously it could also be moved up to the street where a lot of servicing takes place from anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really see it in any of the photos, I don't think, but there are some yellow hatch lines in this area here. Potentially could be used for servicing requirements, both for deliveries to and from, but also waste collection But the applicant has confirmed to me that it will take place from the car parking area. But obviously there are alternatives available if that can't come
Okay.
forward.
Regarding the restaurant, no equipment, etc. I mean, I think you just covered that. That is going to be part of the conditions, isn't it? It won't be a restaurant. It will serve snack food as opposed to a
Yeah.
sit-down restaurant. Or is that licensing? Is that planning or licensing?
When obviously I was considering the plan application, then obviously asked these questions in terms of land use. The applicants confirmed to me that the tenant, the prospective tenant, they will be hot food. They will be selling hot food, but that is limited to toasties and paninis. That hot food, the amount of hot food would always be an ancillary kind of element to what the main use
Primary
would
is
be.
an ice cream vendor. Yeah.
If the amount and nature of hot food changes, so if they start cooking, deep frying, those kind of things, and it then becomes more of a cafe or even a hot food takeaway kind of establishment, then obviously that would be contrary to the land use restrictions that were required by condition and would require planning permission.
Okay. And have we got any details of opening hours and times?
Yes, again, the applicants confirmed that they would like opening between 9 a.m. and 10 at night. That obviously is seasonal, meaning that they could open later and close earlier. There is conditions requiring opening from 8 o'clock in the morning though, not 9 o'clock, from 8 o'clock till 10 o'clock at night to give the applicant a bit of flexibility in terms of opening. They will have to live by those hours of operation. They go beyond those hours of operation, they're operating in without accordance to that condition, allowing us to take enforcement action.
Okay. Right, and I think, the demolition of the old existing building. On one of the pictures, do they have some sort of seating outside of that? Yeah, right, yeah. So it's sort of like tucked in the corner, yeah.
I'm sure there used to be bin storage there at some point, but it obviously doesn't fit with it. But yeah, they do have a small seating area.
Yeah, so there are people already who sit down and eat an ice cream there. Yeah, obviously on a nice day you can't do it in the howling rain and wind, but okay. I think I appreciate the fact that there is a safety issue there. I have walked down there with my grandchildren, and yeah, we had to walk on the road because there was a queue. It was one of those days where there was a big queue, and we had our car parked further into the car park. So yeah, we had to walk past on the road. I accept that. The fact that it's a 3.5% increase on a 3.5 use of the space, percentage use of the space isn't a massive structure, and I appreciate that. So I'm just ticking boxes either side of where.
The only thing I'd say about that is obviously it is an immediate space allocation. So any use is going to compromise the use of that space to some degree. It's helpful that it's located to the far western periphery. It's helpful that it is small in comparison to the rest of the open space. But nonetheless, it is still guided by those policies. So, yes, it's small, but from a planning assessment perspective, the size really doesn't matter. It's helpful, but it doesn't matter. It's the fact that that space has been lost to an alternative.
Okay.
That's for assessment.
So, right, I think that's all I needed to ask. But from my point of view as tourism leisure, as a lead member, I see it as an asset to Fylde. I see it as a development that will enhance that particular area. Obviously, these are not planning material considerations, but they are. And as a tourist, when I visit the area, it'd be nice to sit in somewhere and have a look and have a nice seat and look over the bay and use the facility. It's lovely to go to Fairhaven facility anyway. So, and it enhances the walkway that we've spent millions of pounds making a nice visitable area. Oh, thank you.
for Nixon. We ask now Councillor Evans.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the representations. I echo Councillor Nixon's point that this is without doubt a very emotive application and needs to be considered carefully. If you look at it just on the planning brief, we've basically been asked to consider moving the facility, outdated facility, from one side of the car park to the other. And that in its essence is what we're looking at here. If you dig a little bit deeper, we've got the option, we do nothing. If we're going to do something, I think it's incumbent on us to do the very best that we can do, because as colleagues have already mentioned, there's been a massive investment in the seawall defence system. It's improved the area, and so it's incumbent on us to do the very best development that we can. Rob has answered a couple of my concerns that are there. I consider these things and look at these things in terms of environmental impact, sustainability, value for money, and also accessibility for all people, residents and tourist day visitors. And I think on balance, most of those points are answered by this development in a positive way. I think it's a very attractive new build. I think it will sit well within the tomography of the existing area, the materials that have been used, the sustainable materials that are being used, the sedum roof, which will obviously be mainly viewed from the apartments and residential properties surrounding, help to bed this building in. The accessibility, seating area, increased seating area for elderly people and people with children is a bonus. Sustainability, I think a new facility that gives the operators more space to make sales, because obviously we're looking at this in two ways. In the winter, in November and December, there's not an awful lot of call for ice cream on the promenade, but in the summer, obviously, there's a lot of people, a lot of footfall through that area, and it's good for the operator to be able to tap into that footfall. My main concerns, realistically, would be the conditionality, and you've answered some of those points, Rob, realistically, that, there's a lot of conversation being had here about council doing sort of grubby deals and about the change of use, that we're sort of starting with an ice cream kiosk and we'd end up with a pub stroke nightclub. I think the fact that that we could put some conditionality on it, that the building is operated for the intended use is an important factor, and that helps me make my decision. Restriction on signages is important because, as I said, we've got a very contemporary looking design there, and that'll be detracted from if it's got signage and various different things on the outside. So I'd like to see some conditionality on that.
Councillor, can I just respond on that matter? Obviously, the elevations that you see in front of you, they do have elements of signage on there. Advertising is subject to different legislation,
Right.
which means that we can't restrict advertising by condition on this plan application, but advertising would require advertising consent, or some adverts require advertising consent, so we would be able to assess the impact on the design of the building at that.
Yeah, I mean, it can either be a poster with various different ice creams available, or it could be something that aesthetically ties in with the colour scheme and design of the building. But also rubbish in terms of debris that's left around the area, whether or not there can be any sort of conditionality put into the owners, making sure, obviously they're going to want to keep their area as clean as they possibly can, but I don't know if we could tie something like that into it as well.
Just to respond on that matter, obviously the new sea defence scheme does incorporate quite a few bins along its length. I think this facility will either be used by visitors who stay at that facility, so use the bin provision within the building, or buy a coffee or a panini, for example, then walk along the promenade, so we'll use the other bins along there. Normally, use the example of a drive-through restaurant, for example. Obviously, those kind of uses, they do litter. And in those circumstances, we can obviously do certain things to reduce that littering, such as conditions requiring additional bin provision. But I think because of the amount of bin provision that's already within that area, I wouldn't think that would be necessary.
Right, okay. And just to tie up again, obviously, there has been quite a lot of mention about licensed premises. I wouldn't be happy with it being a licensed premises personally, because I don't think it's for the intended use of the building. But residents should be reassured that if it does ever come up, that they would have to go to licensing, and it would be local people would have the opportunity to protest about that, and at that point it would go to a licensing committee. So I've got less concerns than colleagues about that potential change of use. A more heavy duty catering requirement would require extraction, fryers or anything like that would need a legal required extraction system, and there are no plans on this building for that kind of facility. So I think people could be rest assured that that isn't the intended use. And again, if they wanted to put an extraction system on there, presumably that would have to come back to planning for additional consent.
If the extraction affected the external appearance, and that would require planning permission.
Right, okay. Thanks. I think I've covered most of my points there, and I think it's a great design. There's no doubt about it. It is a great design building. It's been a long journey, and there's been tweaks and changes made from the initial plan, and I'm quite happy with what I see in front of me. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Councillor Evans. And if I can remind from the first speaker, Councillor Ahmet, who started this, it's so easy to stray into areas that are not planning points, and at the moment I think we're focusing quite tightly on planning considerations here, and that's our job, that's our remit as a planning committee, is to actually concern ourselves with not other peripheral items, but actually the planning considerations of the argument. So thank you for all members for the contributions so far. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a site I walk past 4 or 5 times a week with my dog. I know it very well. Really want to start by apologising to some of the people who have come to speak today, because they've raised concerns about the economics of the project, or about we shouldn't be spending the money here. Can't do anything with those at a planning committee. Those aren't planning objections. There could be an application there to build something 20 times more expensive, and we, as a planning authority, this isn't the committee where we look at the costs of things. There are other committees I'm sure will be delighted to look at that, and I hope that they can raise those points with the respective committees. I was very interested in the sequential testing part. I'm very surprised to see that there's 7 empty locations in Ansell. I think I know 4, and I've met the owners of 3 of them recently, and they've got new plans coming forward for those. So I imagine that the other sites in Ansell would not be. I don't even know where they are.
Obviously, the sequential test recognised those units, but it also discounted some for availability.
Yeah.
So that could be the fact that they're not on the market or undergoing works to bring them back into use.
Yeah. But reading the report as well, the sequential testing, there is a specific locational requirement for a cafe overlooking the sea. A cafe overlooking the sea cannot go on a high street. But overall, I think I am quite happy with these proposals. I have heard some of the people speaking today, but I think even one of the people objected said that there's, and I wrote it down, there's no need for better facilities. It is better. It does concern me where that current hut is at the moment on that car park. I have seen accidents there. I've seen people nudged by cars. I've told people to get out of the way before. It is a concern. It does get very, very busy in the height of summer. And if anyone's looked at the back of that hut, the drop down there, to try and redevelop that in that place, I think would be madness. And I think it'd actually cost a darn sight more at that location. So on the balance of it all, I have to say I am in favour of this. Even the objections that came in, they said there's no need or want for it. Again, that's not a planning application, but I think it was one of the speakers said this is an additional facility that we don't need, but then conceded that it's not additional because we're demolishing one as well at the same time. And I think there was a concern there about the demolition, that no one knew about the demolition. It's the first word in the actual application. 1, demolition of existing ice cream building. It's been there from from day one. So on the balance of it, Chairman, I am in support of this. And I'm happy to move it as well.
Are you moving
I'll
approval?
move for
All
approval.
right. I'm going to, do you have a seconder? You second. I'm going to park that though for the benefit of further debate because I think this is really important. But we do have a proposal, a mover and a seconder for approval. And I'm now going to go and carry on the debate.
May I just come in before we call the
Okay,
next
Vice
speaker?
Chair, I'll give you that
Thank you, Chairman.
opportunity to.
It's just on the economic and the cost point. This is not a binary option. It's not this or something else. This was included within the budget, which was discussed at Budget Council on Monday of this week. Most of the members here were at that meeting, and they will know that with one exception, that was carried by every councillor. So that's the first thing. It's not this or something else. This is not a budgeting meeting. This is a planning meeting, as we say. But the other point just on that I'd like to make, when we look at the cost benefit of this, I've heard several discussions both today and previously on this, saying it's going to take 10, 15, 23 years for this to recoup its costs. Well, that might be so to some extent. However, all these discussions, all these arguments overlook one simple fact, and that simple fact is that at the end of whatever period of time it is, we still have an asset, an appreciating asset, a piece of property which this council will own. And should we need to, and this certainly isn't setting any kind of policy or precedent, should we need to, we could offload that and we could recoup the costs like that. Just a point for people to bear in mind. Again, I don't know how relevant it is as a planning consideration, but it is a consideration.
As I say, we will now continue the debate, and I think, although we'll come back to the motion that's been proposed and seconded, Councillor Farrington.
Yeah, it's somewhat good timing really to bring me in just on the back of the last comments made because I'm not a legal person and I read through these documents with a strong element of confusion as to the legal status of that building, who actually owns it, whether it falls in, as one of the speakers talked about earlier, to the covenants from the Cliftons. And I just would like to seek clarification on that, because what we don't want to do is be subjected to legal challenges down the line by people that know far more about law than I do. The other thing I would say that in terms of covenants from the Cliftons, I think, there are legal loopholes, and we all know that we can get things through. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned today is the spirit of an agreement when land is given over to locals and communities. And that was to be kept in perpetuity in the state it's already in. Now, whether you actually agree and with the idea of this and the benefits, and it is a very attractive building, and I can see some benefits. I also am mindful of the fact that, as several people pointed out, there is this notion of the thin end of the wedge. And when you have a covenant that extends right down the Fylde coast, and another speaker quite rightly said that we've got a diverse coastline with different elements, and you can, as a tourist, go and see different elements in the context that you wish, whether it's a family visit for food and beverage, whether it's bird watching. You would pick and choose which areas you go to. Now, to standardise a sort of coastline so that it slowly becomes concreted, you lose the diversity of what the Fylde coast stands for currently. And so I do come back to this thin end of the wedge and the covenants and the spirit of the agreement, because it's there for a reason. So I just think when we make a decision, we've got to be mindful of the history, the diversity of our landscape, and the choice that we already have. And yes, I am for improvements, but I'm also very much in favour of something being kept in the spirit that's intended to lawfully. And so circling back on the original question, do we have a definitive view on the legal status of this land, and would we potentially be open to a legal challenge down the line? Okay.
Yeah, this is planning application, but this is a consideration. I'm going to, because this is a legal point rather than a planning point, but I think it's been raised and therefore needs to be addressed. And I'll bring the legal officer in, Ian Curtis. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman, there are no known restrictive covenants which would affect the development that's proposed. The land concerned doesn't form part of land which was donated by the Clifton family to the predecessor of the council. It appears that the land was bought for valuable consideration from the Clifton family. So the issues, as mentioned in the late observation sheet, issues around charitable trust and so forth do not appear to arise. If there were restrictive covenants, then they would not be a planning consideration in any event. They'd be a matter of private law. I can just go on to address one other point while I have the microphone. Just as it's not a planning it would not be a planning consideration if the investment was a poor investment for the council. That wouldn't be a planning consideration to be considered against the application. The fact that the building, the investment may be a good investment for the council is not an argument or a planning consideration to be weighed in favour of the building. They're simply outside the planning process. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. But
Chair, sorry.
yes, I'll bring Rob back.
Yeah, we just had a quick look at the application form. So, obviously, the council own the land that the existing kiosk sits on, but the actual tenant, I assume, owns the building itself. So the application form has been completed in such a fashion that the council is the applicant, but they've served notice on the tenant of the existing building. So from a planning perspective, at least, the correct certification from an ownership perspective is correct.
So obviously you've got clarification, and whether you're satisfied with that, that's another thing, but you've got what you asked for there, Councillor Farrington. Okay.
I'll leave it for the moment, but I think...
Thank you. Could we have Councillor Pittman, followed by Councillor Settle, Councillor Collins, and then Councillor Ahmed?
Thank you, Chair. I have found the debate and what the speakers have brought very interesting. So I thank them for bringing all this to our attention. I don't have real objections about this kiosk. It is something that I think reflects the changing nature of our recreation and the fact that our coastal pathway has been extended, and the visitors and also the residents would certainly benefit from this facility. It's only going to enhance this area, and that's progress, and we need to be aware that we can't stand still and protect a very tired little building that is going to need repairing at some stage if it remains upright. What I am concerned about, I know music is not going to be allowed. Can you just confirm that?
Yes, there's a condition requiring that there's no live or amplified music within the premises.
Right. So basically, it's not going to be supermarkets, sort of. Yeah. Right. That's fine. My other problem, and it's a wider problem with the way that advertisements appear, particularly to do with local events, and they are basically all along our highway on any railings that there are. And I'm just fearful that this could be an opportunity for more advertisement, and it's not, to my mind, necessary. It would over-commercialise the area, but any structure would end up being an opportunity for Lowther to promote their different events, I do not think it is appropriate on an area, a green space, where it is there for recreation. And I know what you said about, yes, advertisements are subject to separate control, but I am fearful of the direction of travel in Fylde, and I would not like this area to be commercialised in this way with colourful events and images of Martin Kemp again on the poster.
Yeah, I'm assuming that you haven't got a personal sort of thing about Martin Kemp when you.
I think I've seen too much,
Yeah, but
particularly when.
But I think no, I think you make a very serious and pertinent point, and I think we will.
Well,
take
it was
that on
meant to
board.
be a serious point.
Yeah, and I think we take that. So.
Yeah. Karen, if I may, in terms of as Mr. Beltham said earlier, the advertisement control is controlled whilst it's administered by the planning service. It's a separate set of legislation. There are provisions for advertisements to be displayed under what's called deemed consent. So those don't need permission from the planning authority. And those are largely, it's all divided into different classes, but for the purpose of this, it were largely non-illuminated adverts displayed on the premises itself. There are limits to the size of them, limits to the number you can have on each elevation, and so on and so forth. However, if you are advertising something that is off-site, such as an event, as you say, those are not covered by those regulations, by those deemed authorities. So anything on the building that is related to an off-site facility or event would not be covered by the deemed consent, and therefore would need a separate permission. Now, chasing round railings, etc., to stop or to remove those is a constant issue. And we have a nice collection downstairs in the cellar if you want to come and view the ones that we've removed. But it is a constant issue. The actual primary, in terms of street furniture, it's primarily the responsibility of the Highway Authority. But in terms of other structures, it's generally a planning control issue. But we do seek to enforce those regulations, but it is a never-ending battle, I'm afraid.
I think the Highway Authority have got enough problems with their potholes, etc. at the moment. So consequently, yes, I can see it's not a priority. But thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Settle.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll keep this fairly short because my comments regarding the building essentially been made by Councillors Dixon and Evans, and I support those comments. Just surrounding the building, though, I think in a previous meeting we've discussed the issue of landscaping, and Rob said that that's not actually included in this planning application, but I do hope that there will be landscaping around it, even when the building is built, particularly CR-tolerant plants, because that can only add to the visual appearance. That's my only commentary regarding the building. The economic viability of the building has been covered by the Vice Chairman, and I support that comment. That's a matter for the Executive Committee. The terms of the tenancy and the amount payable, etc., is covered by them. The only other comments I have regarding what I regard as two red herrings, really, regarding the effect on Ansdell, which I presume you mean Woodlands Road. If I'm on the front there and want to buy an ice cream or a panini, there's absolutely zero chance I'm going to walk to Woodlands Road. Zero. And tourists, equally so, zero chance. And they probably don't even know where it is. So mentioning Woodlands Road to me is just a complete red herring. Similarly with the issue about the late night noise from the serious drinkers in Lytham. If they go in a pub crawl around Lytham, they will never think to themselves, let's go to this, whatever building is going to be called next, on the front at Fairhaven. There's no chance of that. It's too far away. So I don't think we should bring in emotions like that into this discussion, which is as has been said about a dozen times already, a planning application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Settle. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. We determine this application on the planning merits or otherwise of the application. Any cost, the long-term viability, it's already been said today that doesn't come into it. That was to be discussed elsewhere. But every councillor who supported the budget on Monday supported this scheme financially. Apart from myself, I abstained because this scheme was in it. I object to the cost of it. There's another item in the budget on Monday, which was the roof for Freckleton Village Hall, £30,000 of council taxpayers' money. When Freckleton Parish Council sat on a vast sum of money in trust, that is why I abstained on Monday. I didn't support the scheme then, but looking at the planning merits of it today, this is what we decide in front of us. I can't find reasons to object to it. I find it very hard to support it, but I find it hard to find reasons to object to it from what the officers have said so far. Thank you.
Councillor Collins. Councillor Armitt and then Councillor Griffith.
Yeah, just a quick one, Rob. As this is a council building, and we're kind of leading from the front on the environment, sustainability and green, I don't see much, unless I've missed it, on like heat pumps or solar or making it a green and efficient modern building for the future. Is that missing in the report, or is that part of the design, or have I missed it?
No, there isn't sustainables in the scheme. Under building regulations, obviously, there will be some requirements to build to specific levels of sustainability. There are ecological benefits, could be linked to sustainability. So there is a green ceiling roof on there, which that will deal with a lot of the grass space that's on there.
But in 2024, should we really be building modern buildings for the next 10 years that aren't sustainable, aren't green, aren't environmentally friendly? You know, no solar, no heat pump, no thought in the design to be a modern building.
If I may, Chairman, I think the issue that we've got here is one of what you can extend planning control to cover. The government has been very clear that planning should not be setting standards which are over and above those that are laid out in the building regulations. And there was actually a written ministerial statement only a few weeks ago to that end. So whether you agree with it or not, that's the problem is that we are working within the confines of that legislation, and that's what we seek to do. So obviously the building will have to comply with building regulations, and that will address that particular issue.
But Mark, I mean, yeah, we might have a government that doesn't care about the environment, that's fine. But just saying, oh, it's the rules, surely we can be better than that. We're building a modern building, which is meant to be a modern icon, and we're making it 1920s, design for greenness. It doesn't make sense in a modern world. I get the rules, and I get the Tories don't care about environment, but that just doesn't make sense.
So I think the issue there is one for, like I said, we are considering the application that was put before us. If the council is the proposer of this scheme and wants to propose a heightened level of sustainable energy provision within it, that is for the council as the applicant. But as dealing with this as a local planning authority, we are sort of hamstrung by the rules that we can take into account, and that is the issue we've got. So that is, again, going back to the economics of it, etc. That is a matter for consideration at that part in other committees.
So is it a planning thing that I could propose a condition that it's more green infrastructure is built into the design?
I would say it's not appropriate to do that.
Because
that would be contrary to the written ministerial statement that says leave that to the building regulations.
So we can design bad buildings.
I'm going to bring Vice Chair in for a second.
Councillor Armitt, from your, albeit short time on St Anne's Town Council Planning Committee, you should be aware that that is not a planning consideration. That committee always adds a statement encouraging the applicant to use sustainable methods, etc.
Gavin, when you've been on planning as long as if you ever get to be on planning as long as I've been on it, then you'll also know that good design is part of what we're meant to be doing, and therefore the council is meant to be leading by good design. And saying that because the government won't do it, we won't do it, we'll follow that, is bad design.
Right, I'm going to move on. Councillor Griffiths has been waiting patiently, so it's your opportunity now to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to question, there's no lighting on the coastal footpath at the moment. You've put that the new building will be lit during the hours of darkness, and obviously we're open till 10. I don't know if you're aware of a new report of the difference between the cold white and the warm white light LEDs. Could that be taken into, because it's better for everybody, the warm white, they've now proved. Could that be taken into consideration?
Yes.
Yeah.
There is a condition requiring a lighting scheme to be submitted.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of the report, but I certainly know the issue. It's
Yeah.
perhaps to avoid the blue butcher's lighting, isn't it? I
Yeah,
think.
it's just
So
been in the sky at night magazine. Yeah. Yeah.
sorry,
So
I
can
think
we look at that, please?
we haven't looked at the report, but what I can confirm is that what lighting will be subject to further details for us. We won't be supporting the
Right.
likes of floodlit
Yeah.
illumination, lamppost illumination. It will be low level, and it will be just to light up that site. It won't. We'll try to minimise as much light trespass as possible as part of that scheme.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that question, Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Evans, and then followed by Councillor Ledger.
Thank you, Chair. Looking for some kind of consensus, maybe we could look at a gentle nudge to the developers to create some kind of rainwater capture and utilise that for flushing the toilets. That might be something that would add to its green credentials.
Rob?
Yes, I can certainly take that back as a suggestion. I mean, the only thing I would say is that all these things that we would like to build into the scheme could have an impact on the external appearance of the building as well. So the provision of solar, for example, would have to go on the roof, or it would have to be wall mounted. So that does affect the external appearance. The provision of water butts, again, that will affect the appearance of the building. At the moment, it's a very clean building. There's no rainwater goods in there, there's no extraction, it's all hidden. As soon as you start introducing those elements, and you're diminishing the design that we've originally approved. So again, I would be wary in terms of what we want to make this design into.
And Councillor Ledger.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about the point in the presentation referencing to 3.5% of the green space land. Once that is built on, does that then mean that the rest of the land becomes the new 100%, and we were to receive another application, it would be measured against that, or would that include this land here?
It would be based upon the allocation. At the moment, the reason why we're recommending approval of the scheme is because it enhances both the use of that space, but the tourism value of the wider area as well. So I would say that this space would still be covered by the open space designation, as opposed to reducing the amount of it because of the tourism value that it would still bring.
I just wanted to, something that Councillor Ahmet raised, which I appreciate the officers said was not a material planning consideration, but given that this is in what is designated a green space, that maybe, and given that the applicant is Farnborough Council, that it might be more prudent to be more encouraging for solar panels or heat pumps or other green forward-thinking considerations, rather than it being a random building, you know, on another part of land that is previously been designated for building, just as a good matter for the council. I appreciate perhaps it's not necessarily a strict planning consideration, but in the spirit of joined up thinking, that would be my consideration. And I guess finally, just a small point, just to add a bit of variety to what other people have said about the design of the building. Personally, I would disagree with the people that it's aesthetically pleasing. I mean, it's quite ugly, it's hyper-modernist, and I would imagine in 20, 30 years it's going to be not a very good-looking building considered the other nice, traditional, older heritage buildings around the site. But again, I appreciate that's not a material consideration. I'm just sort of making a point of variety of different tastes.
We take note of your, I mean, when it comes to design and whether people like a particular building, I've often said it's often in the eye of the beholder, and it's about taste and other considerations. Design that's innovative isn't for everybody, and you also have to look at the setting within which the building is placed, and you can come, all of us can come to different conclusions, I think, on that road. But thank you for your comments, and they have been noted. Okay. We are continuing with other items. You're very welcome to stay, but if you have to be somewhere, now is the time to go so that we can continue on to the next item. Thank you. 5-minute comfort break? Yeah, certainly. I think that's popular with everybody. Right, I think we needed that break, so apologies to Mr. and Mrs. Nulty that we were waiting, but you've been here, so you appreciate that sometimes we're refreshed for the next item. So we're invigorated, right? Thank you for that. That's an appropriate word, I think. Item 1, you can find page 4 of the reports, and this particular proposal is the erection of a north stand with standing capacity of 1,800 and associated supporter facilities below, including a car parking area and ancillary facilities. We do have, I think we have Richard Nulty, haven't we, as a speaker? That's just one speaker and the agent, yeah. So I think we'll have Richard up first then.
Do we need to do the intro first?
Oh, yes, sorry, we have to do the brief introduction and introductory presentation, I should say, and then we'll get you up. Okay.
Afternoon, committee. Item 1 on the agenda, Mill Farm Stadium, red circle on the square, on the screen, sorry. To the north of Wesham, south of the M55, for anybody not familiar. The stadium's within the Mill Farm development, so this is an aerial image and the site plan. So the specific area we're looking at, the red edge is very faint here, but it's the north stand. This is located north to south, but it's the north stand here, an area of car parking to the rear of it. And then an element of the access road and an element of this, effectively this beige area here. See on Mill Farm, there's employment development here, other sports pitches, a hockey pitch here, an Aldi and petrol filling station and other outlets to the south. Set the context. So I say it's to the north of Mill Farm Stadium. It's allocated for mixed use in the local plan. And this application in front of us is a retrospective one for the erection of that football stand and the car parking areas, which we've actually first opened just over 3 years ago now. The application has been with us without any real progress for some time, but we've recently had a unilateral undertaking, a legal agreement presented to us by the applicant, which relates to a proposal to limit the capacity on the stadium in relation to the car parking that's available. That's something I'll go through in more detail in the presentation, but that's the reason that we've now got the application in front of us today. There's been various iterations of the applications since it was submitted, so there are a range of parish council and town council comments, and the late observations that you were directed to at the start of the meeting include the latest views of Wesham Town Council. The site's entirely in Wesham, but it does come close to Greenhalgh, and obviously Kirkham and other parishes are in that area. The officer recommendation is to delegate the approval of the application to officers once we've received a signed copy of the unilateral undertaking. Just to put a bit more context to it before the speakers, sorry, Chairman. This is this couple of images. This is the situation before the stand. So when the football stadium was first built, the main stand here, the east stand and the south stand, which are both terracing, were completed, but the north stand never was. That has obviously now been submitted and now been completed. So on a recent area, you can see the change in situation. So there always was land here for parking vehicles. That's now been revised with this larger car park that's the part of the application. This is the stand in question for those not on the site visit. So it's a relatively low stand, albeit one that's larger than the original approval when the stadium was built. And this is taken from Coronation Way, so this is looking at the stadium from within the Mill Farm site. And these are some images of the stand itself and looking inside it. These were taken on Monday at the site visit. And that's what we're looking at. So that's where I'll break for the speakers, Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. So now, Richard, you can come up.
Thank you. Richard, you know the
Right, thanks. The full detail of Greenhalgh Parish views are set out on the agenda on pages 12-13. Our residents rely on facilities in Wesham, Kirkham and beyond, and they face delays, mayhem and conflict over on-street parking on match days. In 2015, this committee approved the Sports Village Master Plan with a promise of on-site parking for every 8.5 spectators in the 6,000 capacity stadium through a CPMS, which has still not been agreed. The applicant's appeal in 2018 to lower this level was lost. And there's an ongoing conflict between the applicant and the Highway Authority, which objects to what is proposed today, and their information is between 14 and 19 on your agenda papers. We have no issue with the North Stand, which completes the stadium and gives it the capacity to meet the club's ambition to reach the Football League. The legal agreement capping the maximum numbers allowed to use the stadium is a dangerous fudge, which totally ignores your newly adopted SPD requiring the provision of 600 on-site spaces plus 6 coach park stands. Setting aside this policy and ignoring the advice of the Highway Authority allows the applicant to release earmarked parking land for other commercial use, but prejudices the club and our community's future. When it's gone, it's gone. Only by repurposing the community use artificial pitches could the FA's minimum standard capacity be met. The present plan for 436 places relies on 105 being provided by a business not under direct control. If this informal arrangement ceases, the stadium would be capped at 55% of its capacity. The applicant has a track record of not conforming to planning requirements. An undertaking to cap attendances in line with available on-site parking is a clunky retrospective enforcement action requiring all the standards of legal protocol, evidence and court times. It's not the same as having 600 marked free spaces that your policy dictates and what our residents want and need. The draft undertaking even contains a clause not precluding the applicant from seeking permission for alternative uses on the car parking spaces areas now listed. Thank you. Enforcement is delegated to officers. They choose whether to act and what needs to be done. In a couple of years' time, if AC File qualifies for promotion, how can a further 200 on-site car parking spaces be magicked? And it'll take a brave officer to actually deny promotion on account of lack of spaces. The community has been frustrated since the stadium first opened by the many promised conditions that have not been enforced. Normal citizens get enforced. This organisation is not challenged. Our overall position is that with the lack of certainty over the management of parking, the application should be refused. And finally, Mr. Chairman, spaces should be free. Charging encourages street parking and slows traffic on the highway. If you do approve today, instruct the office to include free spaces in any undertaking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Richard.
So, yes, I think we have one more.
I think we have Matthew Wyatt, who I believe is the agent. Matthew, if you'd like to come forward.
Thank you. Yes, I'll press my stopwatch. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Matthew Wyatt, and the agent for the applicant, and I'm here to urge your support in a crucial development that enhances AFC Files Mill Farm football ground. The proposed north stand aligns with the original 2015 planning permission, complementing the stadium's aesthetic. Despite being larger, it seamlessly integrates with existing elements, introducing an entirely seated arrangement for a modern, comfortable fan experience. Internally, the stand caters for the fans' needs, providing spaces for socialising, eating and drinking to try and attract spectators earlier and therefore boosting revenue streams. It's not just about creating a place to watch the football, but trying to build an experience around it. Addressing the local concerns we've just heard about, very significant efforts been devoted to parking considerations, and the submitted parking plan indicates 436 available spaces, and it's intended that a legally binding agreement will restrict the stadium's capacity to 4,360, thus meeting Farnborough Council's requirements as per the provision of parking SPD, which the council adopted last year. Match day attendance records, as outlined in the committee report, demonstrate how even at peak attendances, the figures comfortably fall well below the agreed upon capacity restriction, and thus the applicant is happy with the agreement as drafted. In anticipation of any future challenges, the legal agreement ensures a swift adaptation. If parking spaces become unavailable, capacity is reduced, and conversely, additional parking could increase capacity. AFC Files' ambition for Football League status does require that flexibility, and the legal agreement can accommodate for that. I hope the committee will be satisfied that the solicitors from both sides have diligently covered all eventualities in ensuring a comprehensive framework for the future of AFC Files. And choosing a legal agreement over a planning condition also provides the council with faster and more effective means of enforcement. So this underscores the applicant's commitment to transparency, control and accountability. While the car parking management strategy awaits approval, and yes, some further work will be needed, securing your support today is pivotal to finalising this aspect. And I think it's important that the committee tries to separate out concerns about the amount of parking from the management of it, which the applicant is committed to resolving following the approval, hopefully today. I appreciate all the officers' hard work and patience, and I trust the committee will support the recommendation to approve. Thank you.
So I'll ask Andrew to continue his presentation. Thank you, speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Chairman. Yes, so just to give you a little bit more information about the stand itself. It's a typical modern football stand. There's different colours on the plan here, show you the different uses of the ground floor to it. So it's got one floor that you access, and then the spectator accommodations is on the outside, in front of and above that floor of accommodation. So you can see on the screen there's the blue area is a quite a large area of concourse that's available. Probably a product of the design of the stadium being drawn up at the time of social distancing and the greater space around subject food kiosks and the things like that happened at that time. So you've got the blue, the concourse, the kiosk, the toilets. It's nothing that you wouldn't particularly expect to find at a football ground. There's a small museum element to one side, but that's kind of an ancillary football facility also. So nothing sparkling there. The plans and elevations here, as you could see from the image, it follows the same style to the structures at the rest of the stadium. It's much lower than the main stand, but taller than the other stands that were approved, both for the south and the east sides of the stadium that were built when the rest of the stadium was built. But also there was a stand approved of that style in this location. So that wasn't built, but this is a physically larger, but no larger in capacity replacement for that previously approved north stand. So just running through some of the main considerations. As has been mentioned, the planning history here is important. The planning permission improved. The planning permission for the stadium approved, an 1800 capacity stand on this site. Whilst that's not built, that remains extant, so it could have been built. So that really establishes the principle of bringing in that buildings in that area, and also buildings of that supporter capacity. Come to the local plan. While the policy supports a range of commercial uses, it supports the leisure activities. So the football stand is definitely something that satisfies the planning policies. The design is something that fits with the rest of the stadium, and the physical position of the stand and the scale of the stand is such that it's adequately separated from any neighbouring properties. So it's not like a situation at Deepdale, for example, where you've got residential properties quite close to the stadium. Here they are much further away. There have been concerns raised about site drainage by the parish council previously. The drainage arrangements for the site were designed so that each of the individual parcels, if you recall back to the first or one of the earlier slides where we talked about the Aldi and the Tralenco building, each of those parcels on the site has its own drainage system, and the drainage system for the football stadium was designed with the capacity to handle the surface water drainage from this particular stand and the parking areas there. So that is all collected on the site. There's a storage facility under the car park, and then it's released from that at a controlled rate into the surface water drainage for the wider site, which filters through to the brook to the north eventually. So that's dealing with the stand. Dealing with the car parking, there's more spaces on the scheme now than there were under the previously developed or previously approved arrangements for the north stand. So given that there is clearly a concern about the levels of parking on the site as a whole, the concept of using the land immediately behind the stand for car parking, the area where we parked the bus on Monday, those who came on the site visit will recall that area. There's 100 or so spaces in that location that's obviously very conveniently located for this stand, and is a suitable development for areas around a football stadium in all respects. There is a small part of that that's located within the countryside. but the countryside policy does permit essential development that supports other uses. So that element is not in conflict with the countryside policies. In an ideal world, there might be more landscaping around or within, breaking up the car parking, but I think that would inevitably reduce the number of spaces. So in terms of the planning compromise there, I think having the car parking as it is the right way forward. Parking is clearly precious in the area, and the car parking area isn't particularly visually prominent. It's only the users of the car park that would experience it. You don't particularly see it from off-site or particularly prominently from when you are on site. But the overall car parking is on the stadium is obviously the point that that was made by the first speaker. There are and there have been extensive ongoing discussions and concerns raised and dialogue with all parties about the arrangements for car parking at Mill Farms Football Stadium. The original planning permission required that a car parking management strategy be approved prior to the stadium being operational. That remains outstanding. So there is an ongoing breach of that condition with games taking place at the stadium. As part of the original planning approval, there was an indication that there was to be a 500 or so space car park provided to the very north of the site. That hasn't been provided. And so there is, that's kind of the concern that the first speaker raised, that that parking, without that parking, the parking overall on the site is deficient. That's where the unilateral undertaking comes in with this application. The applicant has sought to split the car parking management arrangements into two parts. They've sought to find an agreement on the number of car parking spaces that are provided on site, and then if that was to be agreed, they'll then look at progressing how the management of those would be dealt with through a revision. We have a current application for the car parking management strategy to be agreed. So they would then present a revised version of the parking strategy for consideration under that application. And that would be the mechanism where points like charging for car parking or not, the management of the car parking, the release of the various parking areas, the arrangements for coning off areas off site, that sort of thing. That's all the management that will be left for this outstanding car parking management strategy application. But what we're looking at doing here is dealing with the quantum, the amount of parking that's provided on the Mill Farm site to deal with the needs of the stadium. And the starting point for that has been the adoption of the Fylde Council's Parking Standards SPD last year. That sets out a ratio of one parking space for every 10 spectator capacity of the stadium. So the current capacity, theoretical capacity of the stadium is 6,000. So clearly that would look for 600 spaces to be provided on site if that ratio was applied. There aren't 600 spaces on site. There are 436 spaces on site available at present. And so the legal agreement that's been presented proposes that the capacity of the stadium be restricted, legally restricted, to comply with this 1:10 ratio. And to demonstrate where these 436 parking spaces are, there is a plan that's provided to support this legal agreement, which is this plan. So that's relying on the various coloured areas. So going from the top to the bottom, we've got an area here adjacent to the hockey pitch where there's a parking space, there's a car park that provides 150 spaces. So the proposal here is that 81 of those, so roughly half of those spaces, be set aside for being available for football traffic on match days. That allows the other sporting activities that take place in that area to utilise the remainder. There's there's actually 126 spaces in the car parking area to the rear of the north stand. So there's 20 of those are set aside for a hotel that's situated in the main stand building. So that leaves 106 spaces there. There's 105 spaces within the Trilenco car park. Trilenco is an employer, an employment use that's on site. And I understand there's an arrangement between that business and the football stadium for those spaces to be available during match day needs. And certainly they've been available on the occasions when I've visited to monitor the situation. There's an area to the east of the east stand, so the rear between the east stand and Fleetwood Road, which provides a nominal 40 spaces. That's an area that's generally used by match day staff. So players, stewards, hospitality staff use that area. It's perhaps one of the lesser easy to get into for spectators. So those who are there first and perhaps there longest would use that area. That provides 40 spaces. And then there's an area to the south where I asked the bus to do an emergency stop when we're on site visit, which is known as the South Stand car park. That was originally approved for the siting of a hotel building in the 2015 permission. That's not been taken up, and that element of the planning permission has now expired. So the proposal is that that be set aside for stadium parking. And there's a condition on the agenda papers that area be suitably surfaced and lined so that it can meet that parking demand better than it does at the moment. It's just covered in road planings and it leads to a slightly ad hoc parking arrangement. So when you add those together, you get the 436 spaces. So, sorry, my phone's ringing. You get the 436 spaces. So that's where the legal agreement, once that's signed and completed, that would restrict the capacity of the stadium from the 6,000 that it can currently hold down to 4,360. And then that provides a limit that limits the capacity to what's set out in our parking standards. The idea of the legal agreement would therefore be that should some of these parking spaces become unavailable, such as the Trilenco spaces, for example, then the capacity would automatically be restricted to reflect the fact that the parking on site has been reduced. Equally, should additional parking become available, then that would allow the capacity to increase, obviously not being able to exceed the 6,000 that are physically capable in the buildings at present. And I think that's something that the applicant's quite keen on because clearly as a football club they have ambitions to achieve promotions and there are requirements should they achieve promotion to the Football League for them to have greater capacities than the current arrangement provides. So that's how the legal agreement is set to work. That's legally enforceable. It's fair to bring to members the attention of the views of the Highway Authority. They continue to seek a greater level of parking than is provided under this arrangement. I think they have concerns over the approach that's been presented here. and expressed perhaps wariness over the separation of the quantum from the management, but they have offered to continue in dialogue, and hopefully that dialogue, should it happen, will be productive and will allow progress to be made on this bigger picture situation with the parking. But having talked all that through, your officers are supportive of this approach. Obviously, the recommendation reflects that on the agenda papers here. So that recommendation is that the decision be delegated to officers, so that planning permission is granted for the north stand and the car parking element once the unilateral undertaking has been received in a signed form. It's not signed at the moment, but I understand that's just a legal matter, and it's expected to be signed in the coming days or into next week. So there's not expected to be a delay in that, but it's just as a technicality, it's not signed today. So with the decision relying on that, we're not in a position to recommend that permission be granted today. And that's me done, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to make some opening sort of observations and comments here, and then I'll bring members in. Members will be aware that this has been a long-standing intangible problem, and it's gone on for a number of years. There is a sort of attraction to the idea of a legal agreement that would correlate the required provision of car parking with the attendant use of the football club, i.e. Big clubs ought to have more car parking provision than smaller clubs. And this particular club, aspirational, is trying to get to the Football League. And as I say, there is an attraction to any scheme, if it's legally binding, that would then apportion appropriate car parking provision on the basis of need, rather than projecting years ahead what might be, particularly if that position can be reviewed. For example, they're presently at 436, which if you come down from the 6,000 to 4,300 and something, because even with the 6,000 permission, the health certificate or safety certificate of the ground actually reduced that, didn't it, from the 6,000, etc. Yeah. The point I'm making here as well, we've never had before supplementary planning documents in terms of our requirement for planning provision, and the 1 to 10 is a basis for that, so that, you know, if you go down to 4,346, whatever it is, 4,360, you have then, you know, an appropriate proportion of that as your car parking provision. I've just got a question here, because I hope I'm not sort of perhaps anticipating too much what might be uppermost in some of the members' minds. The first question would be, we don't have a car parking strategy plan, but that could follow from a legal agreement. In what way? The agent said, for example, that this would lead to faster and more effective enforcement, because there are a lot of questions, aren't there, about within the 436 spaces, we have sort of anecdotal evidence that, well, actually on match days, some of that provision isn't even available. And therefore, that's one of the first obvious enforcement requirements in any policy, isn't it? Is that if we're saying there are 436 spaces, then they should be available. And if they're not, how will this help us to enforce that and make it right? The other final point that I want to make is, I do appreciate that, and we need to agree on something that will provide a fixed figure that is deliverable, particularly when they're on 1,400 attendances a match. They're not hitting anything like, even their top one against Chorley was 2,800, I think. But regardless of that, we are also aware that in the Western community in particular, there is widespread disruption in residential areas of street parking. And one of the problems that I'm just going to put out there is that whatever agreement we have in terms of what you provide on site, you could have 600 spaces there, but football supporters may not choose to use them. And that's I'm trying to link, and I'm also trying to sort of give credence to the problems within residential communities, which I know I'm aware of. I've been round there on a match day. I've seen it for myself. But we have to be realistic as well, that if you have a football stadium that is not completely opposite residential communities, but is now being negatively impacted by that, you can't guarantee that even if you have a commitment to provide so many spaces, you might find that on busy days, there are still spaces not used because people are parking down residential streets. And that is something that, as a football fan that for 50 years I've gone away to matches all over the country, you see. However, morally, I think they should provide adequate, appropriate car parking provision so that we cannot say that that disruption to residential communities is directly a response from inadequate provision. You see the point I'm making? It's a really important point. But it's a bit of a ramble, but there are a lot of points in there. And I'm hoping that some people will pick these up. I'm actually in favour of this legal agreement, but I would like to hear how this is going to deliver faster and more effective enforcement and ensure that actually, if we're saying 436, they will be provided. Right, over to you.
Thank you for that, Chairman. There's a number of points you raised there, and I'll perhaps come to Mr. Curtis for the enforcement of the legal matter in a second. The plan, or the image that I've put on the screen here, is from the original planning permission. So this shows the idea of a 500 or 600 space car park being provided at the very northern part of the site. That was suggested relatively late in the consideration of that application to deal with concerns raised by the Highway Authority and others about the number of parking spaces that were provided to accommodate for the spectators that could attend this stadium. That's not being provided, and also as a football fan, when I go to a game, I'm not sure that that is the best location for providing parking for a football stadium, where the access point is here. You've got a spine road that comes through the site to get to that, and then you've got a spine road that comes out to get to it at the end. At the end of the game. So what that may provide quantum of parking, but it may also not be parking that gets effectively used. Because football supporters were more likely to think, I'm not going to park on there, I'm going to park on the surrounding streets, thank you very much. What I think one of the benefits that this scheme does is it provides a range of parking locations that are nearer to the stadium, that are in smaller car parks, so you can, you're not in a big funnel to get off the single exit point. So I think that's perhaps a more practical way of delivering the car parking for the stadium than having that single car parking area at the very north of the site. I think this scheme also helps deal with the flexibility it brings flexibility in the terms that should, said in the earlier presentation, should the Trilenco spaces not become available, it impacts the capacity to reflect that. I think another point you mentioned was about a car parking management strategy. We do have an application with a car parking management strategy in front of us for consideration, a discharge of condition application. That the car parking management strategy was drawn up in December 22. That doesn't take account of what we're talking about today. So I would expect that a revised strategy will be submitted, should this be approved, that would bring in a reflection of this parking arrangement and the capacity numbers, and then would allow real progress to be made towards discharging that, and then operating of the strategy in an enforceable way. It's a planning condition to ensure that the amenity and potentially safety concerns that were articulated by the first speaker and are said to be experienced around the stadium on match days can be dealt with by the planning enforcement system, should that be necessary. So I think that's all the points that you raised for me. I don't know if I can give way to Mr. Curtis to talk about the legal agreement enforceability.
Yeah, certainly, Chairman. A unilateral obligation is a form of planning obligation, the same as an agreement between two parties, between a local planning authority and the applicant. It's enforceable in the same way, and the principal way of enforcing it would be by an injunction. So let's say that the football club, notwithstanding the fact they haven't got the car parking spaces to support a higher attendance, nevertheless open the ground up to a higher attendance. It'll be open to the council to seek through the civil courts an injunction to stop that from happening or stop that from continuing to happen. The process can be short, it can be longer, it can be short. But the main point I would make is that a unilateral obligation or a planning obligation generally is pretty much the main way of getting compliance outside planning conditions. You have unilateral obligations or planning obligations in any number of circumstances for securing affordable housing, for securing contributions, for securing that things happen at the same time as other things. It's an entirely natural and entirely normal way of dealing with matters between a local planning authority and an applicant, which need to be dealt with in that way. So it's not a new and unusual departure to rely on a planning obligation for a matter of this kind.
I'll bring in now Councillor Evans and then Councillor Settle. Oh, you write your names down. We'll go from there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, I start off by, I'm a supporter of sports facilities in rural Fylde. I want to see as many different diverse sports in the area as possible. So, I understand the developer is on a journey of developing this site, but having said that, I've got a few concerns, and you touched on some of them that were there. I've split this into three elements. We haven't got the opportunity to withhold planning permission for this site in reality because the stand's already been built. So we're looking at something that's retrospective, as I understand it. It is unfortunate that the car park management strategy was not met, because that would encourage us to have faith in the developers, and it would show a good faith. And so the legal agreement is obviously being brought forward to almost say, well, we didn't do what we said we were going to do last time, but this is to underline that we'll do what we're going to said we're going to do this time. If you follow my logic. Having been such a long and protracted application, I think it would have shown very good faith to have the agreement signed before this meeting, because again, it's a little bit like a game of chess. You give me that, and then I'll give you this. It's not really the right way to go about planning on such a development, from my point of view. So I wanted to make that point. I can see it from the developer's point of view that they're looking at it at the moment and say we're nowhere near capacity. So we're providing enough spaces for the people that are there at the moment, and we are engaging in the fact that as the crowds grow, we will bring more spaces online. That in itself doesn't deal with the fact that the impact to this development, this new development, because there's nothing there before, is having a detrimental impact on surrounding streets. And that, as you've already highlighted, is the same at any football ground. You know, people want to get away from the ground as quickly as possible afterwards, so they'll look for the easiest way to do that. I pick up Andrew's points that rather than having one central car park to disseminate into different areas would help, but it doesn't deal with the fact that those car parks are all still funneling through one access and entrance point to the site. And I know it was alluded at the site visit that the potential is there for another access, I think it's onto Fylde Road, in the future that would then help traffic flow, but that isn't part of this application at this moment in time. So I understand the steer. I also understand that Lancashire County Council are sort of saying, well, you know, we do have issues with on-street parking, and we are concerned that because of history with the developer that we have got residual concerns about that. How we square that circle as a committee, I don't know. All you could realistically say is that, as Mr. Curtis said, the legal agreement gives us a little bit larger stick, if you like, but that's all we have. So my question realistically is it a requirement to provide those spaces as a prerequisite of the planning permission that we've already granted, or is it acceptable for the spaces to become available as the numbers in the ground increase? Because that seems to be what you're alluding to, Andrew. Yeah, please do.
Yeah, the dealing with that sort of key point first, the planning permission that was granted in 2015 didn't expressly require that parking space be provided. It required that the car parking management strategy be approved, and that it was kind of within that approval that the parking was likely to be delivered. But there's no planning condition that says that area that I showed on the previous slide, that area here was physically to be provided before something happened. The access point, you see on this plan here, this is a plan that the applicant's agent has provided me for the parking spaces. Obviously, this access doesn't exist, and it's not part of this application, but there is clearly an intention at some point in the probably near future for them to make an application for that access point, which I think would assist further if it was to be approved and built in terms of management of parking capacity around the stadium, because it would make the use of the on-site parking spaces more attractive to spectators, both Fylde spectators and particularly visiting spectators who may be coming down from the motorway junction. With regards the submission of the unilateral undertaking in an unsigned form, that's a point that I discussed with the applicant's agent a couple of weeks back. They would have submitted a signed version, but we discussed it, and between us, we agreed that perhaps having it as an unsigned version to accommodate any potential last-minute changes was a better solution than having it presented as a done deal. Whether that was the right approach or not, given the concerns that you've suggested here, I don't know. But I understand that it is imminently capable of being signed and presented in that form.
So am I to believe that if through committee discussions today we wanted to delay this, then that signed document would still be forthcoming?
Well, that's probably a question for the agent, but I've had no indication that wouldn't be the case.
I think the key issue is that without the signed agreement, a planning permission would not be issued.
Yeah.
So the two things are linked. We're not saying, here's the planning permission, please provide us with a signed agreement in the future. The two things are linked together.
It is a bit of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it, really? And that's why I'm saying, what, you know, from my point of view, is what is the intent, you know? And I think we need a little bit of we want to support wherever possible development, but we also need to safeguard the impact that it has on local people. And one of the ways of doing that is making sure that the car parking is readily available. You know, we also touch on the fact that we've got to be careful that we don't have double counting where car parking is being put forward as available space when it's also been utilised for a secondary purpose. Because that is also a bit of a concern as well. But that's my points raised. Thank you, Chair.
In short, no agreement, no planning permission.
Councillor Settle.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a lot of sympathy with all the local residents on this. I can understand the problem fully. The issue, I think, to me is two categories of football supporter. And I might roughly call them the lazy ones or the nervous ones and the tight ones with the money. Looking at the lazy and nervous ones, you go into that football stadium there and you got not much confidence that there's going to be enough spaces there. And I check it as read that it's 436 supplied, you're saying that would be adequate. So there's no confidence on it, and the car parks are spread around. So advertising the existence of the car parks is key to this. And also, and I don't know whether the car park management plan would say such things, but things like volunteer traffic people, as you have at big events, that if you're heading towards that dark blue one at the bottom there and you find it's full, you think, what do I do now? I'll go and park on the road. If there's a volunteer there, he says, well, there's two more up there, and find the spaces for you. So you're not confused in a... Stewarding. So you got some confidence that the spaces are there. The second point is I call them the tight ones. And the point that's made before, I don't want to pay £3 to park there. I'll park on the road. Or probably more likely, I'll park in Aldi, which is got its car park spaces. So, and again, I don't know whether the management strategy would say this, but we should really encourage them to make these free car park spots. And say it's all a matter of practicality to me, that make it as easy as possible to park in all those various car park places. And I don't know if you can ever eliminate awkward people parking on the houses on the other side of the road, but you could absolutely keep it to minimum. In other words, do your best to actually make those car parks work to the maximum. And I think then, I would hope, you'd largely avoid the problem of parking near the houses. Thank you.
Some good points, Councillor Settle. I'm going to throw them back over and also get clarification on charging, etc.
Yeah, thank you. Well, starting off with the charging point, I understand and I have witnessed the situation where visitors to the stadium are driving up from the access point, getting to this point where there's a stewards collecting money off them to car park, and that's causing delay. And that's meaning that the line of cars is backing up to the roundabout and onto the highway. That happened some years ago, but my understanding is that no longer happens. There is no charging for the spaces on the site. But that's not something that is covered in this application. That is something that could be secured through the car parking management strategy. And all the discussions I've had with them in recent times have been about all parking on site being made free of charge, so that it gets rid of the potential delay that paying for money and people coppering up in the car and what have you to get the money together brings to getting people onto site. And that partly down to things like, we talk about the North Stand and having this bigger concourse and all that. The applicant wants people on site. He wants them to get to the ground early, to have a drink, have a refreshments in his premises, rather than parking at Preston and having a bite to eat there and driving in at the very last minute. He wants them to get to the ground early. So that must help with it's in his interest to have the parking on site, because that's what's going to attract people to do it, because they're going to come early and be able to park close to the stadium and use the facilities at the stadium for refreshments and go from there. Just coming back to the Aldi question, my understanding is that the Aldi car park operates under some parking company. So I think if you don't if you park there for over a certain period, you get, so if you're a customer of Aldi, you don't pay, but if you're going to be there for the 2 hours that it takes to watch a football match, you do. I don't think that. Obviously, Aldi want to have spaces available on a Saturday afternoon for people to get there and do the shopping. So they're quite keen on keeping football supporters, by and large, away from their car park.
So I just want to repeat it. The key to this, and Richard used it before, stewarding, is I'm in a West Sport, I'm heading towards that blue car park there. I wouldn't have a clue there's a green one above there. I wouldn't have a clue. So you need some advertising signs or stewards to actually point you in the right direction.
These are all points that are covered in the car parking management strategy that we've seen. It's having stewards on site, it's having areas off-site coned, it's having material on your website that visiting supporters can access and see, right, I'm a York City fan, I'm going to AFC Fylde this Saturday, where am I going to park? It's something that, I'm a football fan myself, so, when I'm going to other stadiums, we do some research about, where you're going to park, where you might just go for a drink and a bite to eat before the game, that kind of thing. And having that information available is something that would be a requirement of any car parking management strategy that we would approve.
And to be fair, I think I'm right in saying that this particular application is about quantum, not quality, and therefore that you need both the car parking strategy,
exactly, Chairman.
Approach, as well as looking at the numbers.
This application is about the North Stand, with this idea of fixing the quantum of parking overall being brought into the mix to help deal with that. The car parking management is a separate matter that will be dealt with under that application, hopefully through a revised version of the current strategy that builds on a scheme here if this is approved.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Griffiths.
I wanted to ask. The first speaker said there should be 6 coach spaces, and when we went on the visit, there's only 2. So where would they be located? Because they'll be big spaces, won't they?
Yeah, it's a good question. The parking for coaches is currently shown on the plan in a location here. There is a condition on the agenda papers that deals with the submission of a scheme of lining of the car park, this south car park. So I think that provides an opportunity to line some spaces up that are suitable for coaches in that location there.
Right.
The main stands here, that's where the players' tunnel is and changing facilities and all that. So the away stands here. So that would be the logical place for me for the coaches that go to football matches are away supporters and the visiting players. So that is the most logical place for that, and that would be covered under the lining that will be submitted for that car parking area, which when we did the emergency stop on the bus, you could see was unsurfaced and unlined, but did have coaches parked on it.
Yeah. Could I ask about? I know people who have a disabled season ticket, and they have an area they go to in the wheelchairs. Is the disabled parking close by? Where would they park? I know they tell me they have to go early to make sure they can get close enough to get the chair out before everybody else arrives.
Again, there are spaces here where the bus parked at first. There were some mobility spaces here. Again, that's as close as you can get to the stadium. And there's these areas on the laybys where the bus did the emergency stop, and other laybys that are, again, as conveniently located to the stadium as possible, so that people who do have mobility issues are able to either get dropped off or are able to park in those locations, depending on the situation.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armitt.
Thanks, Chair. Again, as most people in this room know, I'm a fanatical sports fan and I love sport, and I've been very, very lucky to go to stadia all over the world and see different things. I'm also really think it's great that we've got AFC File. I think it's great that they're doing and what they're developing and everything, where they're going with that. Historically, the football stadiums were in the centre of towns and parking has always been ridiculous. It's been a nightmare. If you go to Anfield or you go to Wimbledon to watch the tennis even, or even Twickenham, it's terrible to park at these places and you've got a nominal number of cars because of history. However, that's history. Those stadia were built a long, long time ago. You then take the modern world, like Bolton, for example, that's built with what looks like a desert of 4,000, 5,000 car park spaces.
Referring to the tap sheet stage.
Well said. And it's fantastic. It's fantastic that you can, with a modern stadia, you can actually build a decent amount of parking to do it. And ironically, Bolton also has a railway station right beside it as well. Because what this isn't built with and doesn't have is decent public transport. And this whole discussion isn't mentioning it. It's not in here either. And I know it's not necessarily direct planning, but to build something that is looking to be future-proofed and have a terrible transport link to it is ridiculous. Walking from Kirkham Station to here is a hike, and you've got to navigate as well to get there as well. And also you're reliant on a train service of Northern Line that doesn't work. So you are going to drive. You know, let's bring a tear to the eye of our chair for a moment. That one moment in history when Blackpool made it to the Premier League and weren't allowed to play at home for many, many weeks because their stadium wasn't ready. So the FA are on that as well. So, and I know we don't often ask any of the speakers, but it would be nice to know if the stands have been designed to be future-proofed, that if they get promoted, that stand can go from 1,500 to 3,000. Has it architecturally been built with the foundation that can easily go up on that? The car parks certainly have not. If next year they get promoted and something else happens, they'll be playing live on Disney across America. They'll be playing Wrexham. And Wrexham will bring numbers, big numbers. If they want to go up to play Blackpool the year after in the next division up, you can't get there from... yeah, and back to Disney. And so but you can't even get there from Blackpool without driving. You know, the closest team in the country can't get to Preston, probably can't get there without driving. So you have to drive because the way it's been placed without having infrastructure. So is this future-proofed at all? If I had the money, I'd be buying the land all around this now, because if they ever went up, these will all be wanting for car parks. There's nowhere else to park. Is this future-proof for promotion? You've got to look at that in terms of, is the design right now? Is the design right for the future? And if we're giving planning permission, I know we have to do it for what is in front of us today. That's again, like the last thing I said about bad planning. This again is bad planning, because we're planning for, they will not get relegated this year now. I'm very confident on that. If they're up middle table, they'll be okay. Next year, they might get promoted. Is this even ready for next year? And if it's not, where does that go then? And we're planning for the residents to have more pain in what is an out-of-town element, which doesn't make any sense to me. The other side of looking at it is, it's a home game every other week. It's 3 hours every fortnight. Who cares? You could say that. Well, that's really unfair on the residents. And that's the way, you know, they're not going to be in Champions League for a little while, so they're not going to have too many other matches like your Anfields and your Old Traffords have to put up with. But it doesn't seem to me to be thought through for that future growth. Can I ask, in terms of proper planning questions, as opposed to me just talking, in terms of the breaches that are happening every week at the moment, technically, what's the penalty they're getting every week for that? And there is this thing with the FA of a fit and proper test for leadership. And if leadership are in conflict with the council, and the leadership have been in conflict with the council for a couple of years, and if leadership are breaching regulations every week, there is a risk of a fit and proper challenge against the leadership of the football club, because they're deliberately doing things which are not legal on a weekly basis. And that puts the risk to the owner of not being able to keep owning his club, as we've seen in other clubs. In terms of the planning strategy, do we have any information on the numbers that come to the ground by railway? Do we have that? Do we have the statistics on other ways that people get there? The 1 in 10 number, is that for events or is that just for commercial operations? And if it's for, does that mean then that the Litherland Festival has to provide 2,500 car parking spaces to be licensed? If it's 1 in 10 for the football, is it 1 in 10 for them? If not, why not? Surely there should be one fits all. And the bigger risk at the moment, I would say, is the discussion we're having on 1,400 attendees or 6,000 capacities. I would imagine like that most grounds in the near future, to make more income, they will want Taylor Swift or somebody maybe not quite Taylor Smith playing in their ground, which then brings the pitches into consideration, and you would have 8,000 there and it would sell out. That could very easily happen this summer. They could very easily get a name to come in and play in a stadium like you do around the country, and that would be 8,000. They cannot just do it on football, because that's not what stadia are used for anymore. They're used for a myriad of other things. And therefore, you're looking at a bigger capacity than 6,000 on that, and it would sell out. So I'm not sure this is future-proofed. I'm not sure it's thinking ahead. And I've got a couple of questions in there.
Try to pick up some of the
points
that have been
that's
made.
probably more than a couple of questions there. But
I think you can extrapolate from that.
So starting off with Taylor Swift, why not? Yeah, good. There is a planning. There was a planning condition, and there is a planning condition that remains enforceable and remains relevant to this stand, that applies to the football stadium as a whole, that limits its use for football stadia without prior agreement of the council. So if they did want to operate it for a Taylor Swift or whoever else to come and do an outdoor concert, that would require an application to the council as planning authority before that could be considered. So it is covered by that condition about it being a football stadium only. One of the questions I can't answer is about the structural ability of the stands to be physically extended. Well, I don't know that it's relevant, because it comes back to the point you made about the application we look at is the one that's in front of us, which deals with the 6,000, which deals with the north stand only. Coming back to the, I've kind of gone away from this Taylor Swift point. We'll come back to Taylor Swift. The sports, the 1 in 10 figure is in the council's car parking SPD, and that's specific to sports stadium. So whether it's AFC filed or any other sports stadium, that's the parking. So if, I don't know what other sports stadium there might be of this sort of size to consider themselves as a sports stadium, but that would apply everywhere. So it wouldn't necessarily apply for an event that's outside the planning system like the Living Festivals, but it would technically apply to the sports pavilion here or other stadium, because that's in the parking standards that's general. In terms of penalties for breaching the condition, there is no penalty at present. The council would need to serve a breach of condition notice and then seek to enforce that. We haven't done that because the breaches haven't been of such significance that formal enforcement action of that nature is justified. It's also the case that there is ongoing dialogue with the applicant, as this application explains, about addressing their car parking management system situation, and I've mentioned previously about having a revised, car parking management strategy presented in the event that this application is approved. Rolling back to the very start of your presentation, you talked about the rail access. The car parking management strategy would need to include elements of how other modes of transport are promoted to away supporters. Kirkham and Western train station is a relatively well-served station. Certainly better than St Anne's. It's got the trains to Blackpool North and Blackpool South. It's just over a kilometre from the stadium. It's not an unwalkable distance for visiting supporters to travel. It's, what is it, a 10-minute walk? It's not as significant. So it is an opportunity for supporters to access the stadium by means other than necessarily by private car. And the car parking management strategy, as that's represented to us, I would expect that would continue to highlight how, in the way that Councillor Settle, my response to Councillor Settle about promoting car parks, it would promote alternative transport means as well. And I think that's all the questions I got out of your contribution.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of time as well, so I'm going to move on to Councillor Collins and then Councillor Nixon and Councillor Ledger.
Thank you, Chair. Lancashire County Council really are not happy with this application. They're also not happy the application that might come before this committee in a couple of weeks for the large building to the north of the site. And when you read what's written in the report, what the applicant's saying, we've heard about fantasy football. This is fantasy football parking. We've got the East Stand. It's for match day officials, players, whatever, but it's included in the spaces for spectators. Yeah, that isn't available for spectators unless you get there very, very early. So I turned up on Saturday and I drove onto the site and went to the light blue car park at the back, and I was stopped by a steward. And he said, what are you here for? I said, well, I'm going to Whitfield. He said, this car park isn't available today. So it was full. It was pretty well full. So he said, 20 of us have had to pay a park on here. And because of the application, I knew that the stewards parked on the East car park. He said, well, it's first come, first served. When that gets full, they go on there. So there's 20 of those spaces used for stewards. And that car park, I was told by officials on the day, that was not available. And it was pretty well full because there's 6 five-a-side football pitches there. Yeah, that's 5-a-side, that's 10 players on a pitch, plus substitutes, plus grandma, granddad come to watch, plus the hockey pitch. It's open till, I think, 9 o'clock at night. It's not just one match on, there's matches flowing. That car park wasn't available. So you've no East car park that you can rely on going forward. I mean, Councillor Armitt talks about future-proofing the ground. Let's future-proof the car park. So no East Stand, there's no spectator parking there. The 3G at the north, that's not always available. Yes, we've got the parking that's the subject to this planning application. That is available going forward if the application is granted. Over to Trilenco. Supposed to be 105 car parking spaces there. There is a legal agreement, but it's a year-on-year legal agreement. There's no guarantee that will be available going forward. It's outside the control of the applicant. Moreover, they have a night shift on weekdays till I think it's 10 o'clock at night. And there's between 20 and 30 of those car parking spaces at the moment needed to be used for employees at the factory. They're not available for spectators at going to AFC Fylde. So the car parking we can rely on, coming down to the South car park, that is allocated employment land. And there's a clause in the agreement, the Speaker alluded to it, that says nothing in the undertaking will prohibit the right to develop any part of the site going forward. So if the applicant came forward, an application came forward for that South car park, it's allocated as employment land. If a suitable application came forward with adequate parking for itself on that ground, we'd have to pass it. Now, on the site visit, We were told by Mr. Stell that there's plans for this, that and the other. There's the road coming through. There's going to be different things. The whole site's going to be developed. And where's the car parking? The car parking's going the other way. The car parking's disappearing. So out of those total that you can actually rely on going forward, you've only got, what, 105? Which limits the capacity to 1,000, 1,050. If it's 150, it's only 1,500. He wants to be in the Football League. He had it on the player's shirts, 2022. That was his aim. He missed it. But he wants to be in the Football League. He said it won't get done this season, but the way they're playing and the results they're getting, they could just scrape it into the playoffs and be there. Certainly they could be there next season. And if they got promoted to League Two, perhaps even League One, they're going to be wanting to use that capacity of 6,000 if they possibly can. So limiting it, you know, if there's a limit of 1,050, 1,500, whatever limit, lower limit you put on, it'll be flouted. It's supposed to have had a car parking management strategy for 10 years. It's supposed to have had a traffic management plan for 10 years. There's been no planning permission for this north stand for 2 years. It's been open 2 years. Whether or not it gets planning permission today is irrelevant because it will still be used at weekend and the weekend after that and the weekend after that. The issue today is, do we grant this and agree that the car parking on that site is adequate? And if we do, when the other application comes forward in a couple of weeks, we'll be saying, well, we've sorted out the car parking now. We don't need the overflow car park that Lancashire County Council desperately want to be on that site. We're going to put the biggest building you've seen in Valford on it. It's going to disappear. We need that overflow car park. Lancashire County Council say we do. I've been through all this. It's obvious we do. I go to away grounds and new grounds, safety is designed into them. You've got car parking areas for away fans. You've got coach parking for away fans. It's all next to the away fans' turnstiles. You're guided in, you're funneled in, it's there. Fans go in, they come out in safety. By having no car parking, a very little inadequate car parking on site, you're putting people in the streets of Weston. Now, they talk about 4,000 being sort of like the threshold where you start to get problems. A few weeks ago, they played Oldham. The attendance that day was 2,500. I wanted to get past the roundabout to go and watch Blackpool. I wanted to be up onto the motorway, turn left, go and watch Blackpool. There was absolute gridlock at that roundabout. Oldham fans were coming down from the motorway. It was backing right up. They're going round the roundabout, onto Mill Farm, realising there's no car parking. The south car park, they're charging £5. It's not free. It's £5 to go on there. They were then coming back onto the roundabout to try and find somewhere to park on the streets of Weston. They were parking on the streets. There's parking across drives. People couldn't get their cars out because cars were parked across. There's a fire station there. There's cars parking on there. The fire engine would have had trouble getting out. But it wouldn't have mattered because they couldn't have got past the roundabout anyway. This is fantasy. The figures there are fantasy. The car parking's disappearing. The development of the ground's going the other way. The overflow car park is needed. Lancashire County Council said so. They keep saying so. And in the past, we're always told, you know, we have to go with what Lancashire County Council say. I know that sometimes they're wrong when they say something's adequate and it's not and whatever, we disagree. But they are so adamant that this is wrong. How can this committee go against this? I talked about safety before. A good number of years ago, probably 40 years ago, I was on Blackpool when a fan was stabbed to death because there was no segregation. Yeah, we don't want to see anything like that again. Safety should be built into this. Adequate car parking should be provided. We should be looking at what Lancashire County Council say and going along with it. I certainly won't be supporting this. I will be voting against this. It's not the planning permission that's the issue. It's by saying you agree with this, you're saying there's adequate car parking on the site, and there clearly isn't. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that contribution, Councillor Collins.
Yeah, certainly. You made a point that Councillor Armitt made that I didn't pick up on. The parking ratio that's calculated is 1 to 10. That's based on the overall capacity and the overall needs of the ground. So it's not 1 to 10 for the spectators, and then there needs to be extra parking for the stewards and marshals and hospitality staff. The 1 to 10 includes their parking arrangements. With the idea being that a bigger crowd would obviously require more stewarding and more hospitality staff and the like. So it's all included within that figure. I suppose the other point to make is that the idea of having this legal agreement with this parking plan is that whilst this is the parking plan at present, the legal agreement includes an element of flexibility, so that should some of these parking spaces not be available, say there is to be an application for the south stand, then for the south car park area, south stand car park here, and that was approved and developed, then that would impact on the capacity of the stadium directly. Equally, they could address that potentially by providing parking elsewhere on the site. It doesn't have to be these 6 parking areas, because the legal agreement includes the opportunity to present a revised parking plan with a different way of slicing the 436 space cake up. Should, for example, talked about other developments on site, let's say there was to be a development here that was a business use that had a big car park, they could put their car parking area, could be built into the scheme, and that could replace spaces should the Trilenco spaces not become available because of the night shift or whatever else, the way that business operates. So there are these unknowns, but the idea of having the legal agreement is to allow for those unknowns to be accommodated in the way that the site operates moving forward.
Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. One of my questions was just about the Trilenco. It's an informal agreement or a formal agreement, did they say? And how would it be incorporated into a legal agreement?
I understand it's a private agreement between the owner of Trilenco and the owner of the site. It's nothing that the council has any awareness of beyond that. The only point I would make is that because they're showing these spaces on the plan, they are being counted in their overall total. If they are not available, then they need to provide those 105 spaces elsewhere.
Okay, all right. So, but could it be incorporated into the legal agreement somehow? Or is that not within the remit of our work?
Yeah, the agreement is offered by the applicant, the landowner, rather than the operators of Trilenco. So I think they're the legal agreement with us, with the council, is presented currently on the basis that there isn't a separate agreement that allows them to offer those spaces. Should that fall away, then going back to what I've just said, they would need to meet that numbers elsewhere.
Okay. I declare myself as a non-football fan. So, please. I really have no interest in football games on that level. Family do, but I don't. So looking at it from my point of view, I've been the driver taking people to football games and dropping them off and going away to prevent parking issues, basically. So I'm more than happy to do that. But everywhere I go, I've been to Liverpool, I've been to Manchester, I've been quite a lot of places, really. The streets in the area are all residents parking. restricted residence parking. Why is that not something, an option that's been looked at within this to prevent the residents being hassled with, you know, people parking illegally, etc. I know it's a Lancashire County Council thing, but if Lancashire County Council are objecting to that extent, why don't they make the streets residents only parking? Is there something that can't happen? And then when you go to events, you buy a ticket. Why don't you buy a ticket in a parking space? Why don't you guarantee yourself a parking space as part of the, you know, the process of going to the match? Might be my naivety about going to football matches. Maybe that's not something football fans think of doing, but to me, it'd be logical.
Taking that again, that last point first. It's really, that's something that is within, or has been within, earlier versions of the car parking management strategy, where there has been a references on the ticketing and indications in the buy a ticket and you get guaranteed a parking space, that kind of thing, to encourage people to buy tickets in advance rather than turning up on the day. And that obviously helps the club plan for the attendance that they're likely to get. So that is something that it's a car parking management strategy thing rather than a North Stand planning application thing. In terms of resident parking zones, you're right, it is a Lancashire County Council matter. Again, I'm not sure whether that's something that they are actively considering or not. But coming back to the car parking management strategy, part of that includes, and the versions of it that we've had have always included coning off of key areas off site. So areas around the road junctions, the Sandling Way, the residents estate nearest, coning off around that junction, coning off on one side of Fleetwood Road around the fire station, coning off on Mowbray Lane on one side. So there's been various sort of key points of coning that's been done to try and make sure that the junctions and narrower roads, if you will, are kept free flowing. Again, that's a car parking management strategy. And there's been, if the club is expecting an attendance of over 2,000, then they'll cone these areas. If it's going to be expected to be, you know, between 1,000 and 2,000, we'll cone lesser areas. So it's at a sliding scale of coning.
And the legal agreement, we've discussed about that to a degree, and it's an enforceable legal agreement, which so that legal agreement, is that part of this application now?
It's been presented by the applicant in support of this application, and as Mr. Evans said, the officer intention is that this planning application will not be determined favourably without a signed legal agreement being presented to the council. So the existence of this legal agreement has been the trigger to bring this application forward for a decision now, rather than 2 years ago or 3 years ago when it was submitted.
So all we're considering now is this North Stand and the car parking that's on that screen now?
No, the physical development that we're considering today is the North Stand and this area of car parking. That's the application.
Okay.
But the legal agreement brings into it this concept of restricting the capacity to the parking that's available. So that's helpful, because the North Stand is whilst it's not increasing the theoretical capacity of the stadium, because there was a stand there of that size in the original planning permission, it is bringing forward an actual capacity over what it was previously, because
it's just all come very convoluted, really, because of all the issues within it. The actual, what we're considering right now is that North Stand and the green parking area at the reverse of it, and that would get approved if it got approved today. That approval would only stand on the on the legal submission of the legal agreement for signing?
No, the legal agreement has been presented to us. We've had it. Mr. Curtis has reviewed it. It's been amended in respect of some of the comments he made. So that's with us. It's just not with us in a signed form. If we were to get a signed form, the recommendation to committee is that planning permission would be granted for this stand and the physical development of this area of car parking. So the red line is effectively that area. So that's what the physical development is, but that is supported by this legal agreement that deals with parking in a wider sense.
Okay, right. On that basis, I'll move that we accept the proposal, and wait. Yeah, when we wait for this legal agreement.
Thank you, Chair. This is in my ward, and I do accept the point that was made at the beginning that there will be a small percentage of stadium attendees who will choose, no matter how much parking there is, to park in Weston. I accept that. But I think Councillor Nixon made a good point that lots of other stadiums around the country were there a long time before housing developments, and also they have the important benefit of private residential parking, which residents in Weston do not. The last application we looked at this morning, whilst I was personally perhaps not in favour of it, I took what the officer said, seriously, as I think it's my duty on this committee, only to consider material considerations, and that's why I voted in favour of it. But I'm struggling with this application because if we could look at the car parking up again, I'm hearing different figures and numbers. The total capacity of the stadium is 6,000. Is that correct? And I feel like we should therefore consider that as a material number. And if I look at those car parking spaces there, if I include the south stand and the east stand and the north stand, that only, my math there only makes it to 250. The other ones are for Trilanco and the 3G pitches. I'm not sure why we can materially consider them as part of this, because they're part of different structures, different buildings, different owners. They're not part of this stadium. And I appreciate the points made that there may only be 4,360 spaces currently being used. But even by that measure, that's still, almost 2,000 short from the, realistically, I think that's irrelevant anyway. We should be considering this relating to its full capacity of 6,000, because that's, the material of the full application. So I can't consider those other car parking spaces as part of this. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I echo the comments that I think everyone else has made around the legal agreement, that it is almost perhaps not even appropriate for this committee to be considering this application without a legal agreement being signed. I do appreciate Mr. Evans made the point that unless that's signed, there's no planning application. So that is slightly reassuring. But I also feel like we only are engaging on having a legal agreement or looking into having a legal agreement because of the behaviour of this developer in the first place and what they've done on the rest of the site, and the sort of litany of smaller changes, continuing changes and continuing planning applications which keep changing. So, and then there's also a final question or point. The original application included a car park in the very north, which is not on that map, but it was on a previous map. Now, later this month, we'll be looking at an application for the HTI space there. But Andrew, I know you made the point that there might be a new road, and it's also it's a bit confusing because we were saying people may not want to go and park up there and then drive back down or walk whatever. And again, I'm not sure we can necessarily consider that, and I'm just trying to figure out what really is material for us to be voting on and what isn't. Are we talking about, because now that car park is not going to be there? Is this road, should we consider that this new road might be in there, or should we not? And from what I'm looking at, I cannot see how we should consider all of those extra car parking spaces, because it just doesn't seem relevant. And we're dealing with a developer that is basically just running rings around this council. We're the authority here. We're the elected members. We're here to make these final decisions, but within the confines of planning legislation. But we keep seeming to bend and come up with new ways to just get around to help this developer build, whatever they like. And I think we might be failing in our duty to just maybe placate this difficult developer, because it's hard work for us. And I think that Mill Farm, it is a good thing for Fylde, it's a good thing for Weston on the whole. But the whole purpose of this planning committee is to make sure that it's developed properly. And time after time, it's been proven that it's not. And now we're being asked to consider things about parking that aren't necessarily relevant to this application. And we're going to be considering things that sort of have been developed on green sites and new buildings. And it's sort of all in bad faith with this developer. So I'm just quite concerned. I realise that's a lot of questions. So, Andrew.
Yeah, of course, first off, the things that aren't material, the character of the developer is never a material planning consideration. So the fact that you may have a view over this particular developer's previous behaviour, that's not something that gets taken into account in the decision on a planning application. Other things that aren't to be considered is the potential development from another planning application elsewhere. So the HTI application isn't for consideration today, so that's not a factor in the decision that will be made. And even less of a factor is this road, because that's not even the subject of an application. So whilst it's on that plan and there's an indication being given to me that there's likely to be an application, there is no application. So that has no significance at all. If you do want to discount the car parking that's shown here that you feel may not be available because it's not in the applicant's control, so the Trilenco spaces and I think you mentioned the 3G pitches spaces, then that's why the legal undertaking is relevant. Because if you only want to accept, or if the Fylde Council only wants to accept that the south stand and the east stand and the north stand car parking spaces are available, then that would restrict the capacity to whatever your maths got that number to times 10. And that's what the legal agreement does. It restricts the capacity not to 436 times 10 to the parking that's available times 10. So if some of these spaces become unavailable, then the capacity is reduced accordingly in line with the terms of the legal agreement. So that is a relevant factor, and that's why we felt we were able to bring it forward, because that moves the debate on the car parking management across the site forward. and helps with the helps with the decision on this application as a consequence. And I don't know if I perhaps didn't make it clear earlier, but the legal agreement wasn't something that we've asked them to do. It's something that the developer proposed. So they suggested it as an opportunity, as a way forward to try and provide the council with control that reflected the position in its parking standards SPD. So it linked that council document to a council decision on this planning application, but it was them that brought it forward rather than something that we said, oh, we need you to do this. Normally it is the other way around. So if a housing developer is coming forward with a scheme that we want to see affordable housing on, we will put it to them that they need to draw up a legal agreement to deliver that. In this case, it was very much the other way around that it was presented. So I think that was all the points that were made. The one thing that has been touched on, I think, by a number of other speakers, I'm sorry, Chairman, if I could just bring this in, is about the potential for AFC file to get promoted and what the implications of that are. I've had a look at the Football League regulations and put a slide on them here. So this is from the EFL handbook, which says that to get if your football position gets you so you could qualify for Football League status, you need to have a capacity of 4,000 to start that season. By the end of April, 30th of April, in the first season, you need to have 5,000 capacity. And then by the third season, you need to have 5,000 capacity and 2,000 of those being seats. So if the club were to achieve promotion on the pitch, then it's in their interests to be able to retain not only the spaces that are shown on this plan, but have an arrangement to be able to provide additional spaces to be able to get to that 5,000 capacity, because they need to have done it before the end of the first season. Otherwise, they're in breach of the Football League regulations from the Football League Handbook, Appendix B.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. So I also was Googling away, and if for 15 months from now, if things go well, and they're up there playing in League Two, the capacity average so far this season on attendance is 17,000 for the first place team, and we get down to 12th, we're still at 6,297 average every week. So going to blow the numbers out of the scale of what they've got here. So they'll either want a bigger ground or they'll be selling out fantastically every week. If we've got the 600 spaces guaranteed off everybody, and if 3 people came in every car, which would be brilliant in this day and age, that's 1,800 people. So 4,200 would have to not come by car. On a 4-train thing from Preston, if one turned up, you get 200. So we've just got 4,000 more people to get there. Somehow, there isn't going to be parking on the site and isn't going to get in there by train. So that's 4,000. If there's 3 a car, we're looking at about another 1,500 cars, 1,200 cars parking around the residence areas. That's if they have a sellout today with the capacity they've got today. I don't think you can do any, I mean, if you put 6 or 7 in a car, you'd be breaking the law. So you've got to go with the numbers that are realistic. So we've got to get 4,000 people there that can't come by train because there isn't any, after that one that I've filled up with football fans. And I've got my car parks full. And that's not including stewards or anything like that. That's including all fans. So it just that doesn't work unless the residents are willing to go for it. In Liverpool, people sell their driveways off. Maybe, that's the way to promote that sort of stuff. That doesn't work. My 2 planning particular questions on that then. If we vote no today, what is the consequence on AFC file? Do they have to close the stand down? That's my first one. I've got one more question to follow up on that. The second question is, Ian mentioned before the consequence of a breach of the regulatory agreement, and we know how many agreements get broken on a regular basis and how we don't enforce. The consequence is that we might go and get a civil case against them and go to what does that mean? The game can't kick off until they've won the court case, or actually, again, does it mean absolutely very little at all?
Perhaps I can answer that, Chairman. Should the football club propose to proceed with a game where there are expected to be a greater crowd than the unilateral obligation would allow, then the council could seek to get an injunction to stop the game going ahead. Yes, it's quite as simple as that. Another point which I'd just make is that the car park agreement, as has been mentioned, sorry, not the car park agreement, the unilateral obligation is very much designed to be capable of raising and lowering the number of the number of spectators allowed in the stadium according to the number of available car parking spaces at the stadium. And that includes spaces which are made available by the owners. So looking at the car parking map that you have in front of you, there are a number of car parking spaces. So taking the Aldi's car parking spaces, which aren't shaded, they're not counted because they're not made available for use with the stadium by the stadium operator. The green car parking spaces above the north stand, they are counted because they're made available by the stadium operator. The brown car parking spaces to the west of the west stand, they are presently counted because they are presently made available, as I understand it, the Trilanco car parking spaces by the operator of the stadium by virtue of the operator of the stadium having an agreement with Trilanco. Should the operator of the stadium cease to have an agreement with Trilanco, so we've heard it's precarious, we've heard it's year on year, so should Trilanco next year decide to withdraw the consent for the stadium operator to use that car park, then those spaces would no longer be counted, because the point of the agreement is the stadium capacity goes up if there are more car parking spaces made available, or down if there are fewer car parking spaces made available. We've heard of the Football League regulations. That would be an issue for if there was a promotion to the Football League, and if the capacity wasn't sufficient for the football to meet the Football League regulations, that would be a problem for the football club and the stadium operator. But nevertheless, this car park agreement and the associated unilateral obligation ties the capacity to the number of available car parking spaces made available by the stadium operator. So I'd like members to be quite sure of that. That's an additional reassurance there, which is not available already, as I understand it.
Chair, through you back to Ian on that and his response to me. That's fine, but how is that policed and in real time? And if you've sold 6,000 tickets and you turn up and they haven't got the car parking that day, who's getting turned away? How's that stopping the mass violence and of people saying, "Oh, you bought a ticket, you've gone, sorry mate, you can't come in, you've got to go home now"? It's just, that's not a logical sense to run a football. It theoretically on a spreadsheet, I get that, but not in the real world. How would that be executed?
I think you have to also build in the planning from the club's point of view, that when they're projecting forward, if they're likely to be cognizant of some of the things that you've mentioned, Ian, they will have to take that into account and suppress certain expectations and delivery. So they'll have to do what it takes to actually conform with the requirements.
Chairman, my second question.
Councillor Armit, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to Councillor Dixon and then Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chairman. Just to bring some pragmatism to this instead of talk of mass violence. We're talking about car parking spaces, for goodness sake. Let's look at what the club's got at the second. It's got an average of attendance of 1,400. It's nowhere even near the capacity that we're talking about now. If this club does go up the league, they'll have demands on the stadium capacity, as we've just seen from the Football League, that they will have to meet. If their capacity has to go up, their parking has to go up. I actually think this legal agreement, if we put it in, gives us more power over that club than we've ever had before. And it's for that reason, after listening to this, that I'm actually going to support this now. Yes, I can see that there's been a lot of planning changes on that site and this and the other, but I think this gives us an extra level of control over it. So I'm actually going to vote for it for that reason.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a small point. I mean, the numbers that have been quoted, who's going to the football match, who's going to all the weather surfaces. We haven't mentioned anybody who might be going to there's a restaurant there, there's a bar there. There are other people using there's a shop there. There are other people. that it has been proposed for approval. I certainly won't be supporting it, but I know Lancashire County Council have said if we are managed to approve it, that the South Stand be surf tarmacked and drained. Yeah. And I also note that clause 6.9 in the unilateral undertaking, if we want to preserve that parking that's there on the site, can we ask that clause 6.9 be removed from the unilateral undertaking, please? It's on the, yeah. Yeah.
Chairman, in terms of the 2 points that you've made there, Councillor Collins, the drainage and surfacing and what have you of the South Stand car park and the East Stand is covered by condition 3 on the agenda, with the idea being that that be resolved before the start, assuming this if we were to assume that the planning permission is granted soon, when the legal agreement is presented. So then that's suggested that's done before the start of next season, 1st of August. So you then talked about paragraph 6.9 of the legal agreement. What do you know what that says? Because I don't have a paragraph 6.9.
Nothing in this deed shall prohibit or limit the right to develop any part of the site in accordance with the planning permission granted after the date of this deed. So basically it's saying that South Stand car park, yeah, it's part of this agreement, but this agreement doesn't stop them applying for planning permission, and it's allocated as employment land, and we as a committee would have to grant that permission if a suitable scheme came forward. If you remove that clause from the agreement, I think that will preserve that car park.
Yeah, I think the key thing is that would allow, they could apply, but then an application for that site would have to be considered against the planning policies, as you rightly say, but also the material planning considerations, of which the use of that area for car parking would certainly be one. So if that was being relied on to provide essential car parking for the operation of the stadium, and they were looking to take away the opportunity to use it for car parking, then that would be something that I would be expecting that this committee took very seriously in its overall decision.
But I mean, as it reads now, it's been put in for a reason. You know, it's not been put in for no reason. You know, just take it out.
I doubt you could put it to the developer, clearly. I doubt whether the developer would be happy to exclude that. And I think to do what Councillor Collins is asking, is seeking the agreement to do, you would need to turn that on its head, really, rather than leave it vacant, to leave it unsaid, and require or ask the developer to include a clause positively saying we will not develop that area of land. Now, I don't think that would be something that a developer would be willing to do. I don't know, you deal with developers more than I do, Mr. Still. But I think just taking that clause out would just take out something which is there to make clear that which is otherwise implied, because there's nothing in the agreement, as I understand it, which expressly says that blue land beneath the South Stand can't be developed. So that's my contribution, Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, Vice Chair wants to come in very quickly.
Thank you. Just really before we move on to the vote, there's been a lot of talk about capacity of stadiums and in some cases fantasy football. I think we talked about clubs with a following of 16,000 and 12,000 and an average within that league was it 7,500, something like that. We need to bear in mind there are also clubs within the league, like I won't name them, but clubs with average gates of 2,500. Many clubs in the lower divisions with stadiums of similar standard, similar capacity to this. So I think we need to take that into account. However, against that, we also need to take into account, maybe at the moment, the average attendance here is 1,400, 1,450 this season. We need to look at the peak attendance, not the average, when we're considering these. The peak attendance since 2013 was 3,858 for a visitor Chorley in the 2016-17 season. So I think that's a realistic figure as to the levels of attendance that we need to cope with on an exceptional basis. Finally, before we move on, I would say the recommendation that we have before us that's been moved and seconded is not to give carte blanche. It's to grant planning permission to be delegated to the head of planning, subject to receipt of the obligations and the various other conditions. So we're not giving carte blanche. If we vote in favour, we're voting in favour of the head of planning and his capable team of working with the club, with the owners, with the applicants on this. Thank you. That was all.
That's a helpful contribution. Thank you. We're going to I'll bring Mark in. Yeah.
Sorry, just coming back on that point that Councillor Collins mentioned. It goes back to that issue about we're considering the application before us, and so we're considering the application with that unilateral undertaking to restrict the capacity based on the parking available. So basically, if the committee consider that agreement, for the want of a better phrase, doesn't cut the mustard, then you are considering that's not acceptable and therefore the application should be refused. So that's effectively how you would need to deal with that particular issue, rather than seeking to potentially defer and go back to the applicant and ask for that.
Yeah, well, I'm seeking to safeguard the car parking going forward. That's the whole intention. So there's adequate car parking on that site. So the thing is, we should refuse it.
Yeah. So if you consider as a committee, any individual member of the committee, if you consider that 106, your officer's recommendation is that 106 gives an assurance that parking can be adequately managed. If you do not agree with that position, then obviously you can vote against the proposal in a second.
Yeah, could I ask Mark or what?
This is the final one now.
Yeah, just to reconfirm what the actual vote is giving the permissions to do in detail, and also what would be the consequence if we did reject it?
So what we've got is can you just flick back to the right. Can you? I don't know if you can see the red line on that plan from where you are, but the red line starts up the top there, comes down that part of Coronation Way. It includes the north stand itself. It includes the east car park and the north car park. So that is the red line that Andrew's just gone round there. That's what's being applied for. I think the key thing to think about in terms of the other plans that you've seen in regards to the car park, the actual car parking areas on that coloured plan, those are really indications from the applicant as to which car parking is currently available, and therefore that we are not just approving a scheme that doesn't have adequate car parking. So that as it's been explained, that the unilateral undertaking basically says that the capacity is based on the available car parking, and as has been explained, that could move around. So, as was mentioned earlier, if the Trilenco land car parking is not available, but some other land is available at the same number of spaces as Trilenco, then there is no change to the available parking. That's the way that the UU is constructed. So what you're actually considering the application for is that, with an indication that that is how the parking could be provided.
And if we reject it, what's the consequence to that?
So if you reject it, there's two things. First of all, obviously, any application that's refused has got a right of appeal. So the appeal will be considered. I presume that given that the development is there, they would exercise that right. They might also submit a further application that sought to address any concerns before the committee. But ultimately, if all that, at the end of all that, those processes, permission is refused, that development will be unauthorised, and then the council would have to consider whether it's expedient to enforce, And presumably at that stage, if we've got an inspector's decision saying that that it's unacceptable, because of course the inspector could say it was acceptable and grant permission, but presuming the worst case scenario for the applicant, then we would serve an enforcement notice. There is currently a right of appeal against that as well, but notwithstanding that, the ultimate would be that the building is removed. Then you go back to, I suppose, the issue that there is a permission for an alternative provision at the North Stand, the original planning permission, so that could be provided in its stead.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Right, we're moving to the vote.
Can we have recorded votes on this, Chair?
We can have a recorded vote. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, 5. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep, fine.
So it's been explained very clearly what we're voting on here, better than I could. So all those in favour, please, will you?
We need to record the vote, Chairman. So I will ask each member in turn whether they're voting for the proposal, which is to grant the planning permission, or against it, or abstaining. So, Councillor Arnott.
Before we go, it's not to grant planning permission.
Sorry, it is. Yes, the Vice Chairman is absolutely correct. Sorry, Chairman. Councillor Arnott.
For.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Evans.
For.
Councillor Farrington.
Against.
Councillor Griffiths.
Again.
Councillor Ledger. Councillor Nixon.
For.
Councillor Pittman. Councillor Settle.
For.
Councillor Redcliffe, the Chairman.
For.
And Councillor Harrison, Vice Chairman.
For.
That's 8 votes for, Chairman, and 4 votes against, with no abstentions.
Can we go to item 5, please? Hopefully this won't take too long. Establishment of a one member steering group. I can say that we're looking at 4 members here. I can put forward 3 names, which will also allow one opposition member to become part of this group. I put myself forward, Councillor Harrison and Councillor Evans. Is there a nomination, please?
There is, it's myself, with agreement.
So therefore, we will add Councillor Collins to that list. That's Councillor Redcliffe, Councillor Harrison, Councillor Evans, and Councillor Collins.
Yes, but yeah, if take a vote,
Yeah. So can we take a vote? All those in favour of electing those? Thank you.
Thank you. Just to confirm as well, for those who aren't aware, that the executive committee is also making up the other half of that steering group. Yes. And so the other night, councillors Dixon, I can't read my own writing.
And Morris.
Michelle Morris, sorry, yeah, that's not an N, it's 2 R's. Sorry. And Councillor Lee were nominated from the executive committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Could I just thank officers for all their support? Pardon? Appeals, there aren't any? Yes, okay, I was going to mention that. But also for your perseverance. It's been a long, what is it, 4.5 hours, something like that? But we've had proper debates. Don't always agree on everything, that will always be the case, but you all get your right to say what you think. And thank you for officers for their support for this particular meeting and for your attendance, and also members of the public as well. And enjoy the rest of your day. What's left of it.